Chapter 4206. The second batch of messengers clearly came with ill intentions. This thought flashed through the minds of Chief Xianxia and the other elders at the same time. In fact, this was also within their expectations. In the previous 5 days, the Pine Crane clan was stubborn and didn't surrender no matter how the first batch of messengers threatened them. Those 2 messengers must have reported the corresponding situation to Commander Mingyi. Because of this, Commander Mingyi sent out the second batch of messengers to denounce them. As expected, the messenger holding the golden silk saw that Chief Xianxia and the rest were still hesitating and didn't kneel. He shouted angrily again, "Xianxia Tao, you didn't kneel when you saw Commander's decree. Is the Pine Crane clan rebelling?" With such a heavy accusation, Chief Xianxia didn't dare to accept it no matter what. He hurriedly led the way and knelt down. The other elders could only endure the humiliation and kneel behind Chief Xianxia. When the messenger saw them bowing their heads and listening to the decree, the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. Only then did he hold up the golden silk and read aloud, "The Pine Crane clan, an ancient clan with a foundation of 40,000 years and a long history. Since we're based on Reincarnation Island, we should take it as our responsibility to defend against the invasion of foreign enemies. Only then can we live up to the nurturing of Reincarnation Island. Now that Reincarnation Island is about to be invaded by foreign enemies, the reaction and decision of the Pine Crane clan has greatly disappointed me and pained me. Far away, the Pine Crane clan has failed the nurturing of Reincarnation Island, the protection and respect of billions of people. Recently, the Pine Crane clan has failed to live up to His Majesty the God Emperor's trust and high regard. They are truly disloyal and shameless. Therefore, I represent the 800 billion people of Reincarnation Island to condemn the Pine Crane clan. I represent His Majesty the God Emperor and Yudu City to punish the Pine Crane clan as a warning to others. From now on, all the properties and territories of the Pine Crane clan will be confiscated. Only ancient Pine Grotto Heaven will be left as mercy. Of the 9,607 people of the Pine Crane clan, other than the 300 guards left behind to guard ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, the rest will be escorted to Yudu for trial. This punishment will be carried out by the 4 great reincarnation divine generals leading 8,000 elite soldiers. We hope the Pine Crane clan will recognize the situation, correct their mistakes and cooperate actively. Anyone who resists or escapes will be killed without mercy." The content in the golden silk was rather long, but the key points were also very prominent. When the messenger finished reading Commander Styx's order, the air seemed to be filled with a thick murderous aura. The messenger slowly rolled up the golden silk and handed it to Patriarch Xianxia. He sneered and said, "Xianxia Tao, you'd better take a look at the Commander-in-Chief's handwritten decree with your own eyes. Who told you to refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit? This is the result of angering the Grand Commander. In a few hours the 4 godly generals and the 8,000-strong army would arrive. Let your clansmen pack their bags and get ready to set off." The messenger purposely dragged out the word, "be on your way," and his tone was full of ridicule. The few elders of the Pine Crane race shuddered, their eyes filled with fear and anger. Although they had guessed that Commander Nether River might very well use the Pine Crane race to establish his authority in his fury, they still didn't believe him. But they hadn't expected Commander Mingyi to be so decisive and give the order so quickly. Furthermore, the punishment was so ruthless. Not only was the Pine Crane race going to be stripped of all their properties and territories, but they were also going to be escorted to Yudu. What did this mean? The entire Pine Crane race would be imprisoned in Yudu. If they didn't surrender and pledge their loyalty to Commander Mingyi, they would either become prisoners or be killed as an example to others. Commander Mingyi still pretended to leave ancient Pine Grotto Heaven to the Pine Crane race and allowed them to station 300 guards there. But everyone knew that this was completely useless. If the Pine Crane race's clansmen were all executed, ancient Pine Grotto Heaven would naturally become ownerless and would be taken back by Commander Mingyi. If the Pine Crane race submitted to Commander Mingyi, they would also be sent to the battlefield as cannon fodder when fighting against the Kenshin in the future. It was estimated that more than 80% of the Pine Crane race's clansmen who were forced to participate in the war would die. In short, no matter if the Pine Crane race surrendered or not, they wouldn't have a good ending. The air in the plaza seemed to have frozen and there was dead silence. Patriarch Xianxia held the golden silk with both hands, but he didn't open it. His expression was very ugly and the joints in his hands were bulging. It was obvious that his heart was overflowing with anger. But he lowered his head and didn't make a sound, nor did he get angry. At this moment there were two choices in front of him. He could either accept Commander Mingi's edict and inform his clansmen to prepare. After a few hours he would be obediently escorted to Yudu to be judged. Or he could resist Commander Mingi's edict and kill the messengers in the plaza. If he chose the former, the Pine Crane race would be finished, and their fate would be controlled by Commander Mingi. Even if Commander Mingi and Martial Blood Prison were lucky enough to block the invasion of the Kenshin in the future, the Pine Crane race would probably be wiped out. Thinking about this, Patriarch Xianxia eliminated the first option. As for the second, if the Pine Crane race wanted to resist the edict and kill the messengers, they would immediately be attacked by the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army. In just a few hours, it would be difficult for the Pine Crane race to strengthen their defenses and make any changes. The only way was to close the entrance of the Grotto Heaven and defend it to the death, fighting against Commander Mingi to the end. But in this way, even if they paid a heavy price, they could still block the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army. Then Commander Mingi would send out more troops to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and kill the Pine Crane race disciples. No one could save the Pine Crane race. Unless a miracle happened. Kenshin miraculously descended from the sky at a critical moment to save them. This thought flashed through Patriarch Xianxia's mind. Even he felt that it was absurd. Where was Kenshin now? It was uncertain when he would come to Reincarnation Island. Moreover, the Pine Crane race had no relationship with Kenshin, so there was no way to contact them. How would Kenshin know about the Pine Crane race's situation? Why would he risk his life to save the Pine Crane race? Patriarch Xianxia felt a little hopeless at this thought. This choice seemed to be a dead end. No matter how he looked at it, the Pine Crane race was forced into a dead end. At this moment, the Pine Crane race elders were also at a loss. They looked at their patriarch and waited for him to make a decision. If their patriarch decided to surrender, they could only endure the humiliation. If their patriarch decided to resist, they would not hesitate to kill him. The messengers also sensed that the atmosphere was a little strange. They seemed to have guessed Patriarch Xianxia's thoughts. The 40 golden armored guards drew their swords and sabers. They were on high alert. The 4 messengers stared at Patriarch Xianxia sharply. They even warned and threatened him. Song Hatao, don't keep making mistakes and bring harm to the entire Pine Crane race. The 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army will be here soon. Don't take any chances. Chapter 4207. In fact, the messengers were also a little panicked. While they were talking, the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the army of 8,000 would soon arrive. In fact, the army would take at least 12 hours to arrive. If Patriarch Xianxia really decided to resist, he would have enough time to kill them dozens of times. Before this, the messenger group had been arrogant and domineering. That was because they represented Commander Mingi. They were confident that the Xianxia tribe would not dare to offend them because of their noble status. But it was different now. Commander Mingi's edict was too ruthless. He wanted to exterminate the Xianxia tribe. If it were anyone else, they would have been enraged and retaliated. Judging from Patriarch Xianxia's expression and reaction, he most likely wanted to resist. If Patriarch Xianxia took action, the messenger group would be the first to be killed. At this thought, the 4 messengers were even more panicked. They regretted being so arrogant before. But now that things had developed to this point, they could not change their attitude and suddenly admit defeat. They could only pray that Song Hetao would calm down and not act on impulse or go crazy. Otherwise, their glorious and awe-inspiring messenger group would become cannon fodder. Under everyone's gaze, Patriarch Xianxia slowly raised his head and straightened his thin body. Under the withered and yellow bamboo hat, his wrinkled and weathered face was full of unyielding and anger. He narrowed his eyes, which flickered with a frightening cold light. He stared at the messengers and spoke in a low voice. Every person in every race has the right to survive at all costs. Our Xianxia tribe has survived for tens of thousands of years and has survived to this day not by sucking up to those in power. Commander Mingi has no right to judge our tribe on behalf of the billions of people on Reincarnation Island. He can only represent the god of the underworld and oppress us ancient clans with his domineering power. As he spoke, Patriarch Xianxia stood up and straightened his back. The elders of the Song He tribe also stood up and stared at the messengers angrily. They had already guessed what their patriarch was going to say. While they were worried, they also felt hot-blooded and proud. After all, they were descendants of ancient clans. Nobility and pride flowed in their bones. They were willing to give up their lives for their pride and dignity. This was very difficult for ordinary people to do. But to the disciples of the ancient clans, in the face of life and death, they could carry it out. The atmosphere in the square changed. It was no longer deathly still. Instead, it was filled with biting cold winds and murderous intent. The messengers began to panic. They were intimidated by Patriarch Song He's aura, and they couldn't help but retreat. Song Hetao, what do you want? Song Hetao, have you gone senile? If you dare to go against the Grand Commander's orders, you'll be killing everyone in the Pine Crane tribe. Elders, what are you still standing there for? Hurry up and persuade your patriarch, he wants to kill all of you. Song He. This is Reincarnation Island, His Majesty the God Emperor's territory. We are all His Majesty the God Emperor's people. It is the duty of you and the Pine Crane race to obey His Majesty the God Emperor's decree. Don't make a mistake. However, not only did the elders of the Pine Crane clan not dissuade their patriarch, they even secretly ordered the guards near the Divine Palace to gather. Since they had decided to fight back, they had to surround the group of messengers. No one could be left alive. Patriarch Song He also turned a deaf ear to the messenger's words. He looked up at the night sky with a solemn expression and sighed in a sorrowful and heavy tone. In the Great Tribulation era, my Pine Crane race doesn't want to have a meteoric rise. We only want to avoid disaster and protect ourselves, but we can't do that. Commander Mingi has gone too far. My race has endured for 1,000 years, but in the end he doesn't even give us a way out. There's no way out, so I can only fight with all my might. Ancestors of the Pine Crane race, please forgive this unfilial descendant. At this moment of life and death, I have no choice but to go crazy for once. Anyway, no matter what I choose, I'll die. Since that's the case, I'd rather die with dignity than disgrace the face and integrity of my ancestors. Patriarch Song He's voice wasn't loud, but it had a kind of soul-stirring power that reverberated in the square. If it were someone else who said this, it would be somewhat hypocritical. However, when it came from his mouth, it didn't feel hypocritical. It even felt a bit tragic and hot-blooded. At this moment, the elders were also affected by his momentum and threw away the consequences and worries. Their blood was boiling and their fighting spirit was burning. There was only one thought in their minds. Even if they would die in the end, they had to fight to their heart's content before they died. Song Hetao, you're crazy. You're really crazy. The messenger who held the golden silk and read the decree suddenly panicked and shouted anxiously. The other 3 messengers saw that the situation was not right, so they hurriedly took him and the guards and flew away. Even if it was a bit embarrassing, and it would weaken Commander Mingi's prestige, they couldn't care less. They had to escape from ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and save their lives first. After a few hours, when Divine General Samsara and the army arrived, they would naturally take revenge for them. The 4 messengers secretly swore that when the time came, they would definitely torture Patriarch Song He and the elders ruthlessly to dispel the hatred in their hearts. However, they could only think about it. Take them down, don't leave a single one alive. Patriarch Song He suddenly raised his hand and gave the order. His tone was exceptionally decisive and domineering. The 6 elders who had been ready for a long time took out their divine weapons without hesitation and rushed toward the 4 messengers with murderous intent. At the same time, more than 300 Divine Lord Guards rushed out of the night sky around the square and formed a circle in an instant, intercepting the group of messengers. What followed was a bloody battle where the number of people was not equal. 6 Divine King Realm Elders led more than 300 Divine Monarch Realm Guards to besiege the 4 messengers and 40 guards. From the very beginning, this battle was a one-sided suppression. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. One side wanted to silence the messengers as soon as possible, while the other side wanted to break out of the encirclement. Both sides unleashed their ultimate skills with all their might, releasing thousands of dazzling divine lights that interweaved in the night sky to form a dazzling scene. All kinds of divine skills and secret skills collided, creating a loud rumbling sound that reverberated between heaven and earth. The square with a radius of 10,000 feet was completely covered by the 5-colored divine lights. Patriarch Song He stood in the night sky and stared at the battlefield expressionlessly. He did not attack. He only silently opened the defensive array of the square to prevent the shockwaves of the battle from spreading out and destroying the surrounding palaces. In just 15 minutes the battle was about to end. The messengers were slaughtered. Only 2 messengers of the 7th Divine King realm were still alive, but they were also severely injured. Before they died, one of the messengers used all his strength to find an opportunity to send out a message jade slip. He wanted to spread the news of the Song He tribe's rebellion. Whoosh! The jade slip flew into the night sky and was about to disappear. The expressions of Patriarch Song He and the other elders changed and they all looked anxious. Chapter 4208. Since the Pine Crane clan had decided to silence them, they had to kill all the messengers and the news could not be leaked. And now, before the messenger died, he actually sent out a transmission jade slip. After a while, the 4 reincarnation divine generals and Commander Mingi would receive the news and know that the Pine Crane clan had rebelled. In that case, the Pine Crane clan would not even have time to prepare. They would be besieged and slaughtered immediately. No matter what, the communication jade slip could not be sent out. However, the jade slip had already risen into the sky and was about to disappear into the night. Even a powerhouse like clan leader Pine Crane could not stop it in time. The nightmare and doomsday of the Pine Crane clan were about to arrive with the disappearance of the communication jade slip. The 2 messengers who were on the verge of death also showed a look of relief. At this critical moment, a dazzling white light suddenly shone in the night sky, and an unexpected figure appeared. It was a handsome young man in a white robe. He exuded the aura of a powerhouse who looked down on the world. No one knew where he came from or where he had been hiding. However, when he appeared, he was in the sky less than 10,000 feet away from the rapidly disappearing communication jade slip. He waved his right hand and shot out a beam of golden light, which condensed into a huge palm and accurately grabbed the communication jade slip. As the golden palm retracted, he grabbed the communication jade slip and turned to look at clan leader Pine Crane and the 2 messengers in the square. Then he crushed the jade slip with a calm expression. He opened his fingers and let the jade slip powder scatter into the night sky. At this moment the square was silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on the white-robed young man. Their hearts were filled with shock and disbelief, but they forgot to exclaim and shout. When everyone saw the white-robed young man's appearance, someone immediately recognized him. Kenshin. It's Kenshin? The first to exclaim was the Pine Crane clan's grand elder. More than 1,100 years ago he had a brief contact with Kenshin, so he naturally recognized him. The others in the square immediately reacted and exclaimed in disbelief. Oh my god! How can Kenshin be here? Am I seeing things? Or am I hallucinating? Unbelievable. Previously I was still fantasizing about this possibility, but I didn't expect it to be too dreamy. Patriarch Song He and the other elders were very excited. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Although Ji Tianxing had intercepted the communication jade slip with his bare hands, it was already shocking enough. However, Patriarch Song He and the other elders had neglected this point and had never mentioned it. After all, in their eyes, Kenshin was incomparably powerful. It was not strange for him to be able to create miracles. In comparison, it was Kenshin's sudden appearance in ancient Pine Paradise that made them even more surprised and shocked. As for the 2 messengers who were on the verge of death, their expressions changed drastically and their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They could not believe that the sword god who caused people to tremble in fear upon hearing his name had actually appeared out of thin air and intercepted the communication jade slip they sent out. This was simply too absurd. Wasn't Kenshin still in the boundless heaven continent? When did he come to the reincarnation island? Moreover, there was no news of Kenshin entering Reincarnation Island. He had appeared in ancient Pine Grotto out of thin air. This was too strange, wasn't it? This won't do. Even if we die here, we must report this news to the Grand Commander. Kenshin has already begun to move, but the Grand Commander and the Grand Marshal don't know anything. This is too scary. These thoughts flashed through the minds of the 2 messengers. They took out their communication jade slips in tacit agreement and sent out the news as quickly as possible. If they could spread this extremely important news, even if they died, the Grand Commander would give them posthumous rewards and treat their families well. Unfortunately, Patriarch Song He and the other elders had already suffered once. How could it happen a second time? The two messengers had just taken out their communication jade slips. Before they could input any information, they were beaten up by Patriarch Song He and the other elders until blood spurted out of their 7 orifices and they were sent flying. The communication jade slips in their hands were also shattered and scattered on the ground. The two messengers were beaten until they were dizzy and almost fainted. The elders swarmed forward and unleashed their ultimate techniques to kill the two messengers. After a series of muffled bangs, blood splattered in the explosion of divine light. The two messengers were killed on the spot. Not even their bones were left. The battle was over and the square finally regained its peace. The Song He tribe did not have time to clean up the battlefield. Under the leadership of Patriarch Song He, they bowed in unison and greeted Ji Tianxing. We pay our respects to Lord Kenshin. Not only Patriarch Song He and the other elders, but hundreds of guards also bowed in unison. It was obvious that everyone's voice was trembling. Clearly they were very excited. Even now many people still felt like they were in a dream. They could not believe that the white-robed young man in front of them was really Kenshin. Ji Tianxing landed on the square. Looking at the respectful and emotional crowd, he nodded slightly and said, "Everyone please rise." Only then did everyone straighten their backs and look at him with burning eyes. They had thousands of words to say and questions in their hearts. Ji Tianxing looked at the square that had been turned into ruins and said to Patriarch Song He, "The battle has just ended. Let everyone clean up the battlefield and recuperate." Patriarch Song He understood what he meant and quickly ordered the guards to clean up the battlefield. He and the other elders hurriedly escorted Ji Tianxing to the conference hall. After entering the conference hall, the two sides exchanged greetings before taking their seats. Patriarch Song He represented everyone and asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "It's really unbelievable. At the most critical moment of our tribe, Lord Kenshin came like a divine soldier from heaven and saved us. This is really amazing. May I ask, Lord Kenshin, when did you arrive at the Reincarnation Island and enter the ancient pine cave?" Patriarch Song He probably felt that his question was a little presumptuous, so he added another sentence. "Please don't blame me, Lord Kenshin. Not only me but everyone else also feels that this is very unbelievable. It's like a dream." Ji Tianxing could certainly understand the feelings of Patriarch Song He and the others, so he did not care. He calmly explained, "A few days ago I arrived at the Reincarnation Island. As long as I did not take the initiative to reveal my whereabouts, Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal's subordinates naturally could not find me. In these few days, I have basically grasped the situation of the Reincarnation Island. Knowing that Commander Mingi might attack the Song He clan, I came to see the situation in person. Coincidentally, the second batch of messengers from Commander Mingi arrived, so I came in effortlessly. Patriarch Song He and the other elders, for the sake of integrity and dignity, you are firm in your ideas and attitudes, and are not afraid of power and oppression. I'm very pleased." Chapter 4209. Upon hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Patriarch Pine Crane and the other elders were shocked and secretly rejoiced. Only then did they realize that Ji Tianxing had already infiltrated ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. However, he had been hiding in the dark, observing the negotiations between the Pine Crane clan and the second batch of messengers. It was only when the Pine Crane clan rebelled and wanted to kill all the messengers that he appeared at the crucial moment. It was because the Pine Crane clan refused to submit to Commander Styx that they could see Kenshin's true appearance and sit here and talk amiably. If Patriarch Pine Crane had compromised and surrendered to Commander Styx, then it would have been a different ending. Fortunately, the heavens had eyes. The Pine Crane clan's persistence and uncompromising finally won Kenshin's trust and favor. At this moment, not only was Patriarch Pine Crane excited, but the other elders were also quite excited, as if they saw a golden and bright future. Of course, these were all thoughts in their hearts and could not be said out loud. Patriarch Pine Crane still had to put on a show. He hurriedly said to Ji Tianxing, "Lord Kenshin, before you appeared we did not know of your existence. What I said at that time was sincere from the bottom of my heart. Although our Pine Crane clan isn't one of the top forces, we still have backbone and bravery. Moreover, we have never compromised with Commander Styx in the past 1,000 years. A few months ago when we learned that you had raised an army in the Boundless Heaven continent and successfully overthrew the rule of the Azura God Emperor, We were very excited and looked forward to it. We hoped day and night that you could come to Reincarnation Island sooner and overthrow the dark rule of the god of the underworld, and return freedom to the people. Therefore we refused Commander Styx's many summons and threats, and we were waiting for your arrival." The other elders hurriedly nodded in agreement and echoed, "That's right. Lord Kenshin, we struggled under the dark rule of the god of the underworld and the oppression of Commander Styx for 1,000 years, but we never saw the light of hope. It wasn't until the news of your return to the god realms spread that we saw the light. If there is anyone in the world who can overthrow the rule of the 5 god emperors and restore peace to the world, freedom and peace to the people, it is you." The few elders flattered and praised Ji Tianxing, clearly expressing that the Pinecrane clan could not wait to submit to him. This was because the ancient clans and rebel alliance forces on the Boundless Heaven continent were the best examples. The Nangong clan, who were the first to express their support for the Kenshin, became the biggest beneficiary. Of course, the Sword God and the Nangong clan were old friends. However, the members of the Pinecrane clan believed that as long as they were the first to side with the Kenshin and publicly expressed their support for the Kenshin occupying the Reincarnation Island, they would definitely be trusted and valued by the Kenshin. If the Pinecrane clan showed enough sincerity and loyalty in the future war, the Pinecrane clan would be able to take over the Pinecrane clan. In that case, after the Kenshin occupied the Reincarnation Island, it was very likely that he would trust the Nangong clan and hand the Reincarnation Island over to the Pinecrane clan to manage. Seeing that the atmosphere was sufficiently enthusiastic and that the foundation was basically in place, clan leader Pinecrane took the opportunity to make a request. "Lord Kenshin, you should also know that the people of the Reincarnation Island are also waiting day and night for you to come and save them as soon as possible. Whether it is to save the people who are suffering or to help you complete your great task of occupying the Reincarnation Island. The Pinecrane clan is duty-bound and is willing to charge and break through the enemy lines and cheer for you." After saying that, clan leader Pinecrane led a few elders and bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. Their attitude was extremely sincere. Back when Ji Tianxing was rebelling in the Boundless Heaven continent, he had to think of all sorts of ways to coerce the ancient clans to submit to him and form the Rebel Alliance. Just forming the Rebel Alliance and gathering the first batch of 10 forces had taken him a lot of time and effort. Now, the ancient clans of the Reincarnation Island had seen the signs from the example of the Boundless Heaven continent. All of them were waiting for him to come sooner so that they could pledge their allegiance to him as soon as they saw him. While this made him feel a little amused, it also made him feel quite relaxed and happy. At least he did not have to waste his breath and time to persuade and subdue those ancient clans one by one. So far, there were 4 ancient clans on the Reincarnation Island that had submitted to Commander Mingi. Including the Pinecrane clan, there were still 5 ancient clans that were in a wait-and-see state. Ji Tianxing believed that the 4 ancient clans were most likely in the same state of mind as the Pinecrane clan. They were all waiting for his arrival and appearance. Tonight, as long as he accepted the Pinecrane clan's submission and spread the news, the other ancient clans would be delighted. When the other 4 ancient clans saw hope, they would definitely be in high spirits and try to contact him. "Clan leader Pinecrane, I am very gratified that your Pinecrane clan has such intentions. At the same time, I am also happy for the hundreds of millions of people on the Reincarnation Island. The integrity that you have shown in the face of Commander Mingi's oppression today will definitely become a story that will be told all over the Reincarnation Island in the future." Ji Tianxing stood up and looked at clan leader Pinecrane and the others with a solemn expression. He said solemnly, "Since the Pinecrane clan's attitude is so sincere, how can I refuse? From tonight onwards, let us take part in a grand undertaking to overthrow the tyrannical hegemony of the god of the underworld and return freedom and peace to the Reincarnation Island." Clan leader Pinecrane and the other elders secretly heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that he had readily agreed. They became more and more excited. Therefore, they bowed again to express their gratitude to Ji Tianxing. In fact, the Pinecrane clan was so eager to submit to Ji Tianxing not only because they wanted to win Ji Tianxing's trust and regard so that they could control the Reincarnation Island in the future. More importantly, in a few hours, the 4 Reincarnation Heavenly Generals would arrive with an army of 8,000. At that time, the Pinecrane clan would be in a very dangerous situation. Even if they could resist the attack of the army, they would have to pay a heavy price. However, if the Sword God accepted their allegiance, it would be a different story. When the 4 reincarnation heavenly generals and the army of 8,000 arrived, Kenshin alone would be able to intimidate everyone and scare off the army of 8,000. Even if the two sides really fought, the Pine Crane clan with Kenshin in charge would definitely win. Since clan leader Pine Crane and the others could think of this problem, Tianxing had already thought of it. However, he did not refuse clan leader Pine Crane's request, nor did he stall for time. Instead, he agreed readily. The reason was that the Pine Crane clan was so sincere in submitting to him, so he had to give them a gift in return. Killing the 4 reincarnation heavenly generals and the army of 8,000 was his gift to the Pine Crane clan. At the same time, it was also a warning to Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. It was also an announcement to the entire Reincarnation Island that Kenshin had arrived. Most importantly, he did not take the 4 reincarnation heavenly generals and the army of 8,000 seriously. Powerful strength was the source of confidence and confidence. Chapter 42:10. Tianxing accepted the Pine Crane clan's pledge of allegiance and allegiance. However, things were not that simple. He still had to go through the necessary procedures. He took out a jade slip with an oath of surrender written on it and said to Patriarch Pine Crane, "Since you already know what happened in the Boundless Heaven continent, you should also know my rules, right?" Everyone present was smart. Of course, no one would feign ignorance at this time. As soon as they saw the jade slip in Tianxing's hand, Patriarch Pine Crane and the other elders understood what it meant. After all, the news that Kenshin had sworn an oath in the name of the Heavenly Tao on behalf of Tianxing and bound the entire Boundless Heaven continent had already spread. Patriarch Pine Crane and the other elders also knew about this. They also heard that Kenshin's Heavenly Tao oath was extremely terrifying, and it was approved and supervised by the Heavenly Tao. However, they had not had the chance to see the contents of the Heavenly Tao oath with their own eyes so far. As a result, when they saw the jade slip in Tianxing's hand, they felt a little nervous but also inexplicably expectant. Well, they just wanted to see how terrifying an oath approved by the Heavenly Tao was. Thus, Patriarch Pine Crane hurriedly took the jade slip and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Lord Kenshin. We naturally know your rules. Whether it's the various ancient clans or the various territorial lords, as long as they want to be loyal to you, they have to swear an oath to the Heavenly Tao and be approved and supervised by the Heavenly Tao. Our Pine Crane clan is sincerely pledging allegiance to you. Naturally, we have to swear an oath to the Heavenly Tao and set an example for the other clans." Patriarch Pine Crane would seize every opportunity to show off and crazily gain Kenshin's favor. This was completely different from the stubbornness and bigotry he displayed when facing Commander Styx's messenger previously. It was as if he was a completely different person. From this, it could be seen that no one's character was the same. Oftentimes, when facing different targets, the attitude and character he displayed was also different. Here is the Pine Crane clan, passed down from ancient times and rooted in Reincarnation Island. Patriarch Pine Crane did not hesitate. He held the jade slip with both hands and began to read the Heavenly Tao oath inside. As he read, he was a little surprised and thought to himself, "Ever since Kenshin appeared, I haven't seen him make this Heavenly Tao oath? Why does the content of this oath seem to be tailor-made for our Pine Crane clan? Could it be that, before Kenshin came to Ancient Pine Grotto, he was already prepared?" When he thought up to this point, Patriarch Song, he had a feeling that Kenshin wasn't as upright, dignified, and honorable as he appeared to be. Combined with Kenshin's series of schemes in the Boundless Heaven continent, his elusive tracks, and the various miracles he had created, he was certain that Kenshin was extremely shrewd and extremely resourceful. In front of such a powerful and scheming expert, it was better not to play any tricks. He might not be able to deceive Kenshin and obtain any benefits. He might even lose his life in the process. Thinking of this, Patriarch Song, he obediently recited the oath of surrender, not daring to think about anything else. The content of the oath that followed made his expression change slightly, and he felt a lot of pressure. The oaths of the Heavenly Tao were more and more detailed and demanding than the previous one. Patriarch Song, his forehead was gradually covered in sweat, and his face became more and more solemn. The elders listened quietly, but they were more and more shocked, worried, and fearful. Previously, they were still curious about the oath that Kenshin had made. Now they were no longer curious, and they finally understood why the rumors said that oaths of the Heavenly Tao were terrifying. At this moment, they only had one feeling. That was, after Patriarch Song he recited this oath, he would be absolutely loyal to Kenshin. and would not do anything that would harm Kenshin's interests or harm Kenshin. Whether it was direct betrayal, disobedience or resistance, or indirect passivity, neglect or disobedience, they would all be supervised and punished by the heavenly Tao. Patriarch Song He and the elders suddenly understood. No wonder Kenshin trusted the 20 factions of the Rebel Alliance so much, as well as the nearly 100 territorial lords of the Boundless Heaven continent. He had completely handed over the control of the Boundless Heaven continent to the Nangong clan without any misgivings. So that was it. They had learned something new. Even if he wasn't in the Boundless Heaven continent, even if he went anywhere, he wouldn't have to worry about the Boundless Heaven continent. After all, the heavens were always helping him monitor those who had made the heavenly Tao oath. Who would dare to betray them? Just like that, Patriarch Song He finished reciting the 1,000-word oath in a heavy, sorrowful and helpless mood. His entire body lit up with dazzling divine light, and a wisp of Daoist rhyme circled above his head. Not only were there dazzling flashes of lightning in the sky, but there was also the sound of thunder rumbling. Clearly, the heavenly Tao oath had been established and he was recognized and supervised by the heavens. From this moment onward, Patriarch Song He was one of Kenshin's most loyal subjects. After a while, all kinds of strange phenomena gradually disappeared. Patriarch Song He's forehead was covered in cold sweat and his face was pale. He lowered his head and didn't say anything, silently holding the jade slip and returning it to Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing didn't reach out to take it. Instead he said calmly, "Apart from the Patriarch, there's also the Deputy Patriarch." Patriarch Song He and the elders were stunned for a moment. When they came to their senses they smiled bitterly and helplessly. They didn't expect Kenshin to be so cautious. It wasn't enough for the Patriarch to swear the heavenly Tao oath, but the Deputy Patriarch had to recite the oath as well. However, they were all smart people. They knew that Kenshin was doing this to ensure that nothing would happen to the Pine Crane tribe. Otherwise, if the Patriarch only swore the heavenly Tao oath, there could still be problems. For example, if Patriarch Song He was killed or impeached by the Pine Crane tribe, then the Pine Crane tribe could still break free from Kenshin's control. However, if the Deputy Patriarch also swore the heavenly Tao oath, then it would be safer. It couldn't be that both the Patriarch and the Deputy Patriarch would be killed or impeached by the tribe, right? After figuring that out, the Patriarch and the elders could understand Ji Tianxing's actions. Thus, the Patriarch cupped his hands at Ji Tianxing and said, "The Deputy Patriarch has been in closed-door cultivation for 80 years and hasn't come out yet. If there's a need, I'll order someone to knock on his door and wake him up now." Everyone understood that the Deputy Patriarch had been in closed-door cultivation for 80 years. He must be trying to break through a major realm. If they knocked on his door at this time and forcefully woke him up, it was very likely that his 80 years of cultivation would be wasted. Ji Tianxing was also a reasonable person. He waved his hand and said, "In that case, there's no need to wake him up first. We'll make it up after he comes out of closed-door cultivation. Song Hatao, keep this jade slip and supervise the Deputy Patriarch's recitation of the oath after he comes out of closed-door cultivation." Thus, the jade slip was left in Patriarch Song He's hands in the end. Moreover, he also had the task of supervising the Deputy Patriarch's recitation of the heavenly Tao oath. It was more or less awkward. However, this was Ji Tianxing's order. He had just recited the heavenly Tao oath, so there was no way he could disobey. He could only keep the jade slip and respectfully acknowledge the order. Chapter 42:11. The Pine Crane clan surrendered to Ji Tianxing in this way. This also meant that Ji Tianxing had taken the first step to develop his forces on the Reincarnation Island and establish the Rebel Alliance's Reincarnation Island branch. He sat on the throne at the head of the hall and waved his hand to signal Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders to return to their seats instead of standing in the hall. Next, let's discuss how to deal with the Reincarnation Divine General and the 8,000 troops. Also, what arrangements will Commander Mingi make after we defeat the 8,000-strong army? Ji Tianxing's words showed that he was not afraid of the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and the 8,000 troops at all. He also had absolute confidence in defeating them. What they needed to discuss was how to deploy the troops so that they could defeat the 8,000 troops more easily and minimize the casualties. They also needed to deduce the next move and plan of Commander Mingi after the 8,000 troops were defeated. Only by predicting the enemy's moves and predicting the enemy's plans and actions in advance could they take the initiative and have the advantage. Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders all understood these simple truths. Therefore, they were very cooperative and took the initiative to tell Ji Tianxing the situation of the Pine Crane clan's defense and the details of the troops. Although Nangong Ni Huang Nangong Ao and the others used the magic skills he taught them to inquire about various aspects of the Reincarnation Island. He also had a general understanding of the basic situation of the Pine Crane clan. However, Patriarch Pine Crane's report was more detailed, which also allowed him to make judgments and decisions more intuitively. After Patriarch Pine Crane finished his report, the elders added more information. After listening to their reports, Ji Tianxing made adjustments and instructions. There are more than 8,000 disciples in the Pine Crane clan, but only about 4,000 people can join the battle. Before, you had to resist Commander Mingyi's order, but you couldn't fall out with him. You could only take a conservative defensive posture. Almost all the troops are arranged in the ancient pine cave, mainly to protect the defensive formation at the entrance. Ji Tianxing analyzed calmly. Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders all nodded to show their agreement and waited for him to continue. Ji Tianxing continued. However, the 4 Samsara divine generals and the 8,000 soldiers don't know that the Pine Crane tribe has fought back and killed the messengers. Therefore, they should have rushed over at a normal speed and entered ancient Pine Grotto Heaven to escort the disciples of Pine Crane clan to Yudu. In other words, the most they could expect was that the Pine Crane clan would likely resist and counterattack when they deployed a large number of troops in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. But they would never have imagined that the Pine Crane clan would have the courage and determination to set up an ambush outside ancient Pine Paradise. Upon hearing this, Patriarch Song He and the other elders immediately understood what he meant, and their expressions changed. Lord Kenshin, do you mean to transfer our clan's disciples out of the cave abode and set up an ambush in the wilderness to besiege the 8,000-strong army? Lord Kenshin, I'm afraid this isn't appropriate. Yes. We only have 4,000 disciples who can participate in the battle. How can we besiege an army of 8,000? What's more, we'll stay in the Grotto Heaven and have the protection of the great defensive formation. We can get twice the result with half the effort. Lord Kenshin, I have a suggestion. We can put the 8,000-strong army into the Grotto Heaven and then try to besiege them. Wouldn't that be safer? Patriarch Song He and the other elders had the same reaction. Upon hearing that Ji Tianxing wanted to send their clan's disciples to set up an ambush outside the Grotto Heaven, they were instantly filled with worry. Without the protection of the great defensive formation of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, they had no sense of security. Only when they fought in the Grotto Heaven would they have the confidence and certainty. Of course, this was under the premise that Ji Tianxing was there to oversee the situation. However, Ji Tianxing was indifferent to the suggestion of Patriarch Song He and the other elders. With an indifferent expression, he said, "How could Commander Mingyi and the Samsara divine generals not have guessed this? How could they not be on guard? Also, are you sure you want to fight in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven? You must know that swords have no eyes. If more than 10,000 soldiers fight, the aftermath of the battle will definitely turn ancient Pine Grotto Heaven into a mess. Many innocent people will also suffer." Upon hearing this, Patriarch Song He and the other elders hesitated. What Lord Kenshin said makes sense. Ji Tianxing continued. Moreover, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan have to set up an ambush outside the Grotto Heaven with the help of the Great Formation. Only then can we unleash the greatest power. You don't have much time left. In a few hours, the 8,000-strong army will arrive. The longer you delay, the more danger the Pine Crane clan will face. Patriarch Song He and the other elders' eyes lit up when they heard Ji Tianxing say to set up the Great Formation. They saw hope again. Patriarch Song He looked at Ji Tianxing with sparkling eyes and asked expectantly, "Lord Kenshin, we only have a few hours to prepare. Can you set up the Great Formation in such a short time?" Patriarch Song He and the other elders did not dare to believe it. However, they all knew that Kenshin was best at creating miracles, so they still had some expectations in their hearts. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation, 6 hours is enough. Patriarch Song He and the other elders were shocked, and a strong sense of hope ignited in their hearts. They immediately dispelled their worries. In their opinion, if Kenshin personally set up the Great Formation, how could it be of a low grade? It was at least a high-grade king-grade defensive Great Formation. One had to know that ancient Pine Grotto Heaven's Great Formation was only a high-grade king-grade defensive Great Formation. To be able to set up such a great formation in 6 hours, Kenshin really created miracles time and time again. It was amazing. Patriarch Song He no longer had any worries and nodded decisively, "We will follow Lord Kenshin's orders." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said in a dignified tone, "Then what are we waiting for? Gather the disciples of the Pine Crane clan immediately." Patriarch Song He acknowledged the order and hurriedly left with the other elders to pass down the order. In a short while, thousands of Pine Crane disciples received the order. In order to not leak the news in advance, no one leaked the news that Kenshin was here. As a result, many Pine Crane disciples were very confused and worried when they learned that they were to gather outside the Grotto Heaven to set up an ambush. In their opinion, were the Patriarch and elders crazy? Was it not safer to stay inside the Grotto Heaven? Why did they have to set up an ambush outside the Grotto Heaven? However, no matter how confused they were, they did not dare to disobey the Patriarch's orders and could only do as they were told. In a short 7 minutes, the 4,000 Pine Crane disciples had gathered in the square. Patriarch Song He and the other elders then led the 4,000 disciples and left ancient Pine Grotto Heaven in a grandiose manner. Ji Tianqing maintained his invisible state and hid his aura, quietly following behind the group. Soon, the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane clan stopped 20,000 miles away from ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. There were towering mountains and steep ridges all around, covered with lush primitive forests that revealed hazy outlines under the night sky. Chapter 42:12. This area was the place Ji Tianqing had chosen to set up the ambush. It looked very ordinary and there was nothing special about it. Moreover, it was still 20,000 miles away from ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Anyone who passed by this place would not pay much attention to it. After the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe stopped, Ji Tianqing secretly commanded Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders. Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders then commanded the 4,000 disciples to spread out in the night sky. According to their special positions, these people were scattered among the mountains and rivers within a radius of 10,000 miles, forming a huge encirclement. Then Ji Tianqing took out 49 high-grade king-level divine artifacts and handed them to Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders. They placed them in the designated locations as the foundation of the formation. Then it was Ji Tianqing's turn to cast his spell and set up the formation. He was covered in a layer of hazy golden light that covered his appearance and aura. The disciples of the Pine Crane tribe could not recognize him. As he released his divine power, thousands of dazzling divine lights descended from the sky and turned into thousands of threads that connected in the area. They intertwined to form the network of the formation. The 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe were curious and in awe of him. They all guessed his identity. Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders could not explain too much. They only said that he was a mysterious expert that they had invited to help the Pine Crane tribe survive the crisis. In order to prevent the disciples of the Pine Crane tribe from investigating further, Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders led the crowd to release their divine power and cooperate with Ji Tianqing to set up the formation. As a result, the speed of setting up the formation increased significantly. Time passed quietly. Divine light flickered between heaven and earth. It was dazzling. Patriarch Pine Crane and the others concealed Ji Tianqing's identity in order to not leak the news. While they were setting up the formation, Patriarch Pine Crane also sent out a dozen deacons and more than 1,000 disciples to patrol the area within 100,000 miles. Their purpose was to prevent Commander Styx's spies and scouts from secretly coming to the area and discovering anything unusual. Unknowingly, 4 hours passed. The deacons and more than 1,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe who were in charge of patrolling did not discover anything unusual. They were certain that there were no Commander Styx's spies within 100,000 miles. At this time, Ji Tianqing's work of setting up the defensive array was also coming to an end. After 4 hours of continuous casting, the 2,000-plus Pine Crane disciples were tired and weak. Thus, Ji Tianqing told them to stop casting spells and sit down to meditate and recover their powers. The finishing work was done by him, Patriarch Song He, a few elders and a dozen deacons. After another quarter of an hour, the array was finally completed. This formation, which had a radius of 10,000 miles, was actually made up of 2 king-grade high-grade divine formations. It was extremely powerful. The 2-in-1 formation not only had a powerful sealing and suppressive power, it also had a powerful offensive power. With the help of this powerful grand formation, the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane clan were very confident that they could annihilate the 8,000-strong army that was about to arrive. Patriarch Song He and the other elders had participated in the entire process of setting up the grand formation. They saw it clearly and deeply felt how complex, exquisite and powerful the grand formation was. Originally, they had thought that Ji Tianqing was already very impressive to be able to complete a king-grade high-grade divine formation in 4 hours. Now they knew that Ji Tianqing had actually set up 2 king-grade high-grade arrays in 4 hours. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would not have believed it. This was simply a miracle. Since Ji Tianqing had accomplished this feat, Patriarch Song He and the other elders were even more relieved. They were even more confident that they could annihilate the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army. Soon, a ray of light appeared on the horizon. The sky was about to brighten. The deacons and disciples of the Pine Crane tribe who were patrolling outside also returned to the grand formation. Ji Tianqing said to Patriarch Song He and the other elders, "Based on the time, the 8,000-strong army should be arriving soon. I will now activate the grand formation and pass down the order for everyone to prepare to conceal themselves." If the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe were to conceal their auras, it would be very difficult for them to escape the detection of the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army. Before the 8,000-strong army entered the ambush, they would discover the danger. Therefore, Ji Tianqing had considered this point when he set up the grand formation. He added the effect of concealment and aura concealment in the grand formation. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand and shot out a divine light to activate the grand formation. Patriarch Song He also quickly ordered the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe who were still recuperating to be alert immediately. Thanks to the thousands of disciples of the Pine Crane tribe who were already in position when the grand formation was set up. Now that they had finished their meditation and did not need to get into formation, they did not waste much time. Soon the grand formation was fully activated. A 5-colored light shield with a radius of 10,000 miles shrouded the entire area. Ji Tianqing, Patriarch Song He, and the 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe were all enveloped by the grand formation. After a short while, the colorful divine light shield gradually faded away and disappeared into the darkness of the night. In actual fact, the grand formation did not disappear but was completely concealed. Not only was it invisible to the naked eye, it could not be detected using soul trace as well. Along with it, the 4,000 over people in the grand formation disappeared as well. Even if it was an 8th or 9th stage realm God King expert, if they passed by this area, they would not be able to discover any abnormalities without careful investigation. This was the grand formation set up by Ji Tianqing, and it was extraordinarily marvelous. The 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe were under the protection of the grand formation and did not know the profoundness, so their reactions were still considered calm. Whereas Patriarch Song He and the few elders were all strong practitioners and could clearly sense the marvelous effects of the grand formation. They were all astonished. At the same time, the more remarkable Kenshin's performance was, the more confident and calm they were. 15 minutes later, the sky turned bright and a new day had arrived. 30 minutes later, the sun rose slowly and the sky became clear. The 4,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe had been waiting patiently and were on alert at all times. Right at this moment, in the sky tens of thousands of miles away, a 5-colored divine light lit up. From 20 to 30,000 miles away, they could see 4 divine warships that were thousands of feet long. They were arranged in a formation and were speeding over at a moderate speed. The 4 divine warships were similar in style. They were completely black and had a sharp appearance. They were filled with the intention of attacking and killing. The body of the divine warships was also engraved with the same pattern. With Ji Tianqing and Patriarch Song He's understanding, they could tell at a glance that it was the insignia of the Blood Hell Marshal. It was naturally not the Blood Hell Marshal who came. It was the 4 reincarnation divine generals under the Blood Hell Marshal and the 8,000-strong army. From the calm and steady attitude of the 4 divine warships, they did not know that the Pine Crane tribe had fought back and the messenger group had been killed. Even though the 4 divine warships also showed vigilance and alertness, they were not strict enough and did not check the surroundings carefully. As a result, The 4 divine warships flew into the ambush under the watchful eyes of the 4,000 Pine Crane tribe members. Chapter 42:13. This 10,000-mile-wide ambush was the route Ji Tianxing had deduced that the 8,000-mile-wide army would take. It turned out that his conjecture was right. The 4 divine warships were indeed going to pass through the ambush and head straight for the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. The 4 reincarnation divine generals who commanded the 8,000-strong army were not useless. They were not only LV8 divine king realm experts, but also seasoned generals. They were very sensitive to danger. After entering the ambush, 3 of the reincarnation divine generals realized that something was wrong. They released their divine senses to scan the surroundings. Other than the mountains and forests, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. But they had a strange feeling that there were many pairs of eyes filled with murderous intent staring at them. It was like a pack of hungry wolves staring at a lamb that was stepping into a bottomless abyss. The 3 divine generals of Samsara were startled by this intense sense of danger. They immediately ordered the divine ship to stop. Only the 4th divine warship reacted slowly. It continued to fly forward for a few hundred miles before stopping. The 4 reincarnation divine generals were about to discuss telepathically what was wrong. At this moment, the mountains and forests in all directions suddenly lit up with 5-colored divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The dazzling divine light spread out as soon as it appeared, turning into a 10,000-mile-wide formation. It was like a giant 10,000-mile-wide bowl that was turned upside down on the ground. In fact, this wasn't the formation that had just been activated. The formation had always been in operation. This was just the effect that people could see with their eyes when the formation was no longer invisible. As the 5-colored light shield appeared, an invisible suppressive force came down from the sky and enveloped the 4 divine warships. The 4 divine warships were caught off guard. They were immediately suppressed and fell from the sky, crashing into the mountains and the ground. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of muffled sounds, the ground shook. 2 mountains collapsed and turned into ruins. The sudden change startled the 8,000-strong army in the 4 divine warships. Without the reincarnation divine general's orders, the 8,000-strong elite soldiers took out their divine weapons and quickly got ready for battle. At this moment, Patriarch Pine Crane and the 4,000 Pine Crane clansmen appeared one after another. When the 4 reincarnation immortal generals saw Patriarch Pine Crane and the 4,000 Pine Crane clansmen who had formed an ambush, their expressions became a little strange. A member of the Pine Crane race? They actually set up a formation here, to ambush us? With just these 4,000 Pine Crane disciples? Where did the Pine Crane race get their courage from? Even if they disobeyed orders and risked their lives to resist, they should still be entrenched in ancient Pine Grotto. Why would they run outside the grotto? That old man Song Hetao is really muddle-headed. By relying on ancient Pine Grotto Heaven's defensive array, the Pine Crane clan could still hold on for a few days. I didn't expect that they would actually leave ancient Pine Grotto and take the initiative to come here to set up an ambush. They're courting death. The 4 Samsara immortal generals had been worried, vigilant, and flustered. Seeing that it was the Pine Crane tribesmen who were lying in ambush here, the 4 Samsara immortal generals felt relieved instantly. They even felt like laughing. In their opinion, Patriarch Pine Crane must have been driven into a corner and lost his mind in anger. He actually made such a stupid decision. Even the soldiers under their command thought the same. They thought the patriarch of the Pine Crane clan was muddle-headed. However, after the 4 Samsara immortal generals calmed down, they realized that the situation was not right. They hurriedly communicated with each other through voice transmission. Since the Pine Crane clan wants to disobey the commander-in-chief's order, why didn't the messenger group send a warning? I suspect that the 2 batches of messengers sent by the commander-in-chief have been killed by the Pine Crane clan. If that's the case, the Pine Crane clan is determined to resist. The second batch of messengers arrived a few hours earlier than us. If there was an ambush here at that time, they would definitely send a warning. Since they didn't send a warning, it means that the ambush and formation here were set up in the last few hours. This formation is a king-grade superior divine formation? Is the Pine Crane clan so capable that they could complete this formation in just a few hours? Although Song Hetao is stubborn, he's not stupid. He definitely won't lead his clansmen to their deaths. Therefore I think there's a big problem here. Everyone must be careful. Don't panic. Let the soldiers be on full alert. Wait for me to check Song Hetao's strength. The 4 Samsara Immortal generals had the same strength, realm and status, but there was a difference in age and experience. Among them were 2 relatively young middle-aged god kings, as well as 2 relatively older god kings. Among the 4 of them, an old man with white hair and beard was the leader. He stepped out of the divine worship and looked down at the patriarch of the Pine Crane clan. With a cold expression he shouted, "Song Hetao, do you know the consequences of disobeying the commander-in-chief's order?" The patriarch of the Pine Crane clan looked at him fearlessly and replied with the same cold expression, "Humph. Commander-in-Chief Mingi is cruel and immoral. He wants to exterminate the Pine Crane clan. Are we supposed to stretch out our necks and let him kill us?" If Ji Tianxing hadn't shown up tonight, he wouldn't have answered the Samsara Immortal General's question in such a tough manner. However, Kenshin was standing right behind him. At this moment he felt like he was invincible and feared no one. Of course he didn't take the Samsara Immortal General seriously. Even if Commander-in-Chief Mingi came he wouldn't be afraid, let alone the 4 Samsara Immortal Generals. After all, Kenshin could kill even the clone of the Azura God Emperor. Killing Commander-in-Chief Mingi would be a piece of cake for him. Seeing the patriarch of the Pine Crane clan so confident and arrogant, the 4 Samsara Immortal Generals were so angry that their eyes flashed with murderous intent. Song Hetao, you are really audacious. How dare you be so rebellious? Song Hetao, you're finished. Not only you but all the disciples of the Pine Crane clan will be buried with you. You old dog, don't think we don't know what you're planning. Aren't you waiting for Kenshin to come so you can pledge your loyalty to Kenshin? Let me tell you, you won't be able to wait. You'll die tonight. This is the territory of His Majesty the God of the Underworld. On this continent, no one can go against the will of His Majesty the God Emperor. The 4 Samsara Immortal Generals spoke one after another, showing their tough and domineering attitudes. If it were any other day, the patriarch of the Pine Crane clan would definitely be intimidated and try to stall for time. But now he was only filled with anger and murderous intent as well as lofty sentiments. Kenshin was watching him from behind. He couldn't show any sign of weakness. He looked at the 4 Samsara Immortal Generals and sneered contemptuously. 4 lackeys of Commander-in-Chief Mingi, you don't even know that you're in a desperate situation. How dare you boast so shamelessly? Since you're so eager to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Chapter 42:14. Patriarch Pine Crane's attitude was very decisive. Since they had shed all pretense of cordiality and were about to start a war, he waved his hand without hesitation and gave the order to attack. The 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals looked at each other. They all felt that this was too strange. They pretended to be dignified and fierce to test the Pine Crane tribe's strength. They wanted to see if they had any hidden trump cards. However, before they could test their trump cards and strength, Pine Crane could not help but want to start a war. What was this? You only have 4,000 Pine Crane disciples, but we have an army of 8,000. You are the weaker one. We should be arrogant and domineering. Why is it the other way around? Those who do not know would think that you have 16,000 people. The 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals found it strange. They could not help but think, could it be that the Pine Crane tribe already had the intention to rebel and asked other forces for help? Apart from the 4,000 Pine Crane disciples, there are thousands of people from other forces lying in ambush here? When this thought flashed through their minds, the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals could not help but release their divine consciousness and use their special skills to check the situation around them. The result disappointed and surprised them. There was no one else in the formation within 10,000 miles except for them and the 4,000 Pine Crane tribe members. Outside the formation, there was nothing unusual in the area within 80,000 miles. There were no reinforcements from the Pine Crane tribe. This made them even more puzzled. Where did the Pine Crane tribe get their confidence from? However, time did not allow the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals to think too much. The 4,000 Pine Crane disciples received the order from Patriarch Pine Crane. They unleashed their full strength without hesitation and launched an attack. They knew that the enemy had an army of 8,000 and they were at a disadvantage. However, they believed that their patriarch and elders would not do anything that they were not confident in. Moreover, the mysterious expert who suddenly disappeared and did not show up was still lurking in the dark. This gave them great confidence. Although the 4,000 Pine Crane tribe members did not know who the mysterious expert was. However, they believed that the mysterious expert who was respected by their patriarch and elders must be a peak godly king. Since they had a peak godly king on their side, what was there to be afraid of? Kill. Charge. Kill all of Commander Mingi's lackeys. Let these damned beasts come but never return. The elders of the Pine Crane race let out heart-shaking cries. They also waved their divine weapons and led the attack. They used all their special skills to attack the 4 godly ships. The deacons of the Pine Crane race also led their 4,000 disciples to form a battle formation. They unleashed divine arts that blotted out the sky and bombarded the 4 divine warships. Swish, swish, whoosh. In an instant, tens of thousands of sharp blades of divine light, wind, fire, and lightning enveloped an area of thousands of miles and poured down like a torrential flood. After the 4 divine ships fell to the ground, they had been desperately trying to return to the night sky. Seeing that the Pine Crane tribe had launched an attack, the 4 Samsara Immortal generals did not hesitate any longer. They hurriedly gave the order to counterattack. And they also shouted, roared, and waved their divine weapons. They used all kinds of special skills to counterattack. The soldiers operating the 4 divine warships also hurriedly activated rows of divine cannons, releasing dazzling beams of light that blasted toward the Pine Crane tribe. A large-scale battle between 10,000 people thus began. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, the divine powers and secret arts released by both sides, as well as the sharp blades of divine light that filled the sky, collided violently. Logically speaking, the reincarnation divine general had double the number of people of the Pine Crane tribe. They should have the absolute advantage. But the result of the first round of battle was beyond everyone's expectations. With a deafening explosion, the sky was filled with divine light shards. The divine skills of both sides dissipated. After a round of head-on clashes, they were actually evenly matched. No one had the upper hand. 200 to 300 people from both sides were injured. Dozens of people were killed on the spot. The 4 divine generals of Samsara were stunned by this result. The 3,000 people of the Pine Crane tribe were also stunned. They found it unbelievable. But they only froze for a moment before they realized what was going on. It was the formation that spanned 10,000 miles. It was the divine formation's credit. Both sides were in the divine formation. The Pine Crane tribe was not affected at all. But the 8,000 soldiers were restrained and suppressed by an invisible force. Their combat power was reduced by half. Understanding that, the Pine Crane tribe was full of confidence. They shouted with high morale and launched the second round of attack. The 4 reincarnation divine generals realized the problem and changed their strategy immediately. We can't fight the Pine Crane tribe in this formation. It's not good for us. You 2 lead the soldiers and block the attacks of the Pine Crane tribe. I'll study this formation and destroy it as soon as possible. In the blink of an eye, the leading white-haired elder gave out the task decisively. But before they could carry it out, there was a sudden change. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 4 dazzling golden swords appeared above everyone's heads in the night sky. They slashed at the 4 godly ships that had crashed to the ground. Each golden sword was thousands of feet long. They were condensed and contained a terrifying aura that could destroy everything. There was also an invisible pressure from the heavenly Tao. Sensing the power of the 4 swords, the 4 reincarnation divine generals were dumbfounded. Their eyes were filled with terror. They knew that the power of the 4 swords was terrifyingly powerful. Even if it was a 9th stage realm expert like Commander Mingi or Marshal Blood Prison, they would absolutely not be able to display such a valiant divine ability. It was highly possible that this was the work of a peak godly king. At the thought of this, the 4 reincarnation divine generals were horrified. At the same time, they finally understood why the Pine Crane tribe was so confident and arrogant. With the help of a peak godly king, they indeed had the right to be arrogant and take the initiative to attack. Boom, 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 boom. The next moment, the 4 dazzling golden swords accurately struck the 4 godly ships. As expected, the 4 king-grade upper-grade godly ships were split into 2 on the spot. Shards and godly lights splattered everywhere. The 200 soldiers who stayed behind to guard the godly ships were all killed without exception. They were smashed into pieces. The 4 godly ships were destroyed. They could not provide firepower support to the 8,000 soldiers and also cut off the possibility of them escaping. This scene terrified the 8,000 soldiers and their morale dropped by more than half. The 3,000 over Pine Crane tribe members saw the terrifying power of the golden swords and knew that it was the work of a mysterious expert. They became even more excited and agitated. They launched an attack with high morale. Xianxia did not stay idle. After destroying the 4 godly ships with one move, he continued to remain invisible. He waved his hand and shot out a few sword lights towards the 4 reincarnation divine generals. Book guest residence reading website. Chapter 42:15. Swish, 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 swish. 4 beams of golden sword light appeared in the seemingly empty night sky and attacked the 4 reincarnation divine generals. The reincarnation divine generals, who were still frightened, immediately pulled themselves together and used all their strength to defend themselves. Some took out several divine weapons, some used all their strength to form shields, and some used all their strength to attack the golden sword light. The 4 reincarnation divine generals had different reactions, but the result was the same. Bang, 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 bang. The collision of divine skills created an earth-shattering sound. Shards of divine light splashed all over the sky and created a violent hurricane. The 4 reincarnation divine generals, who were in the 8th tier of the divine king realm, were all sent flying by the golden sword light. Blood spurted out of their 7 orifices as they crashed heavily into the ground 1,000 miles away. Therefore, a few more unlucky mountains were smashed into ruins by the 4 reincarnation divine generals. Puff, blurg. The 4 reincarnation divine generals were covered in blood and dust. They struggled to crawl out of the ruins, but they couldn't stop vomiting blood. Their opponent had only used one move to severely injure them and mess up their divine power. Therefore they were right. Their opponent was definitely a peak divine king. But the question was, which peak divine king was it? Why didn't he show up after using 2 moves in a row? Not even a trace of him? No one on the reincarnation island could use such a miraculous art of invisibility and hiding one's aura. These thoughts flashed through the 4 reincarnation divine generals' minds as they suppressed their injuries. They analyzed and speculated the opponent's identity. But no matter how they speculated, they couldn't suspect Xianxia. Because no one would have thought that Xianxia had already arrived on the reincarnation island and saved the Pine Crane tribe in such a timely manner. On the other side, the battle between the Pine Crane tribe and the army of 8,000 had reached an intense and chaotic state. After witnessing the destruction of the divine warship and the reincarnation divine generals being sent flying and vomiting blood, the 8,000 elite soldiers were terrified and uneasy. Their morale dropped to a freezing point. Moreover, they had been suppressed by the formation and couldn't use half of their combat power. Therefore, although they had twice the number of people compared to the Pine Crane tribe, they were evenly matched and even in a passive situation. The 4 reincarnation divine generals had just crawled out of the ruins and returned to the night sky. They were about to gather together and work together to fend off the mysterious expert hiding in the dark to prevent the other party's attack. At this time, Xianxia attacked again. He punched out the dragon elephant divine fist with his left hand at a reincarnation divine general. His right hand pinched the sword finger and released all of his strength. 3 5-colored giant swords shot toward the 3 divine generals of Samsara. Throughout the entire process he still did not show himself. Bang! Bang bang bang! The 4 heavily wounded divine generals of Samsara immediately came to their senses. They cast spells to resist and evade, but it was too late. Following 4 muffled explosions, the white-haired old man was blasted apart by the draconic elephant divine fist, turning into fragments that drifted down from the sky. The other 3 Samsara divine generals were also cut in half by the 5-colored giant sword. Their divine bodies quickly collapsed and disintegrated in the 5-colored divine light, turning into dust. In this way, the 4 Samsara divine generals were killed by Xianxia in 2 moves. Moreover, after they died, not even their remains were left behind. Only a few dozen godhead fragments were left behind. This result not only shocked the 8,000 soldiers, but also caused them to lose their morale and their formation to be disrupted. Even Patriarch Pine Crane, the elders, and the deacons were caught off guard and were full of shock. In their eyes, the lofty, powerful and honorable Samsara divine generals were experts that they could not provoke easily. They did not expect that the 4 Samsara divine generals together could not block Lord Kenshin's second move and were killed directly. What kind of joke was this? The battle had just begun, okay? The soldiers had just exchanged a few moves, and the 4 generals had already been blasted into dust? Was there still a need to fight this battle? Wasn't it too easy to win? What happened next was just as Pine Crane had expected. After the 4 Samsara divine generals were killed, the soldiers under their command were scared out of their wits. They no longer had any fighting spirit and scattered in all directions. Not only did their morale drop, but they also lost their commander. They were like a sheet of loose sand. How could they fight? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a ray of golden light, collecting the godhead fragments of the 4 Samsara divine generals. Then he controlled the formation to release tens of thousands of silver sword lights to kill the 7,000 soldiers who were frantically running away. Pine Crane's people also seized this opportunity to besiege and kill the fleeing soldiers quickly. The result was self-evident. The soldiers could not escape the formation's blockade, nor could they withstand the sword lights and the killing of Pine Crane's people. In less than 15 minutes, more than half of the 8,000 soldiers were killed. Only about 2,000 were left. These soldiers were completely terrified and broke down. They threw away their weapons and shouted that they wanted to surrender. Patriarch Pine Crane did not dare to make a decision on his own. He hurriedly sent a message to Ji Tianxing to ask for instructions. Ji Tianxing, who was invisible, stood above the battlefield and watched the scene quietly. He only replied to Patriarch Song He with a single word. Okay. Patriarch Pine Crane was very tactful and immediately understood what he meant. And so the battle came to an end. Pine Crane's people accepted the surrender of the 2,000 soldiers and captured them all. They were imprisoned in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, waiting for Kenshin to deal with them. Next was to escort the captives and clean up the battlefield. The Pine Crane's elders and disciples would take care of these trivial matters. Patriarch Pine Crane led more than 3,000 disciples and escorted more than 2,000 captives back to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing also waved his hand to cast a spell and temporarily closed the formation. He quietly flew to the Grotto Heaven's entrance. He did not remove the formation and kept it for the time being. He thought that it might come in handy later. After all, tonight was his first battle to conquer Reincarnation Island, but he did not show up in public. Even if the 4 divine generals of Samsara and the 8,000 soldiers were defeated, they would not know who they were defeated by. As long as Pine Crane's people kept the news a secret, there was room for maneuvering. Ji Tianxing already had a follow-up plan. He planned to use this opportunity to continue trapping Commander Mingi. After Ji Tianxing returned to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, he waited patiently in the conference hall. It was not until an hour later that Patriarch Pine Crane hurriedly entered the hall with 4 elders. It could be seen that Patriarch Pine Crane and the elders were very excited. They were in an excellent state of mind and even their faces were rosy. Presumably, they had not recovered from the previous shock and joy of winning an easy victory. Lord Kenshin, we won a great victory in this battle and captured 2,530 captives. They are all imprisoned in the underground prison in the depths of the Grotto Heaven. Lord Kenshin, don't worry. We have doubled the number of people guarding the prison. Moreover, we have sealed the captives with a secret technique, restricting their divine power and movement. Patriarch Pine Crane did not beat around the bush and reported the key information directly. Ji Tianxing was very satisfied and said with a smile, I did not show up in this battle because I did not want to reveal my whereabouts. Pine Crane's people must also keep it a secret. Next, according to my plan, release the news as soon as possible. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 42:16. A few hours ago, Ji Tianxing, Patriarch Song He, and a few elders had discussed the follow-up plan during a meeting. Ji Tianxing had full confidence in ambushing the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000-strong army, so he didn't discuss it too much. The main point of his discussion with Chief Song He and a few elders was what to do after dealing with the 8,000-strong army. Show up openly and announce to everyone on Reincarnation Island that Kenshin had arrived and saved the Pine Crane tribe from danger. Doing so would appear open and righteous, and at the same time, it would be very high profile. The result was that the people on Reincarnation Island cheered and were extremely excited. They looked forward to Kenshin conquering Reincarnation Island as soon as possible and returning freedom to the people. However, after Commander Mingi and Blood Prison Marshal received the news, they would also double their vigilance. There was a high possibility that they would withdraw their forces and hide in Yudu, not attacking easily. In this way, even if Ji Tianqing subdued a few ancient clans and formed the Rebel Alliance, Reincarnation Island Army, it would be difficult to weaken the enemy's forces. The Rebel Alliance could only attack Yudu and fight a decisive battle with Commander Mingi and Blood Prison Marshal. The difference in numbers and military strength between the two sides was huge. It was definitely not a wise choice to fight a decisive battle right away. Therefore, Ji Tianqing told Chief Song He and a few elders that he would hide and not appear to avoid leaking the news. He also told Chief Song He and the others what to do after dealing with the 8,000-strong army. Now things were going according to his plan. After the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and the 8,000-strong army were dealt with, it was time for Chief Song He to take action. Yes, Lord Kenshin. Chief Song He and the 4 elders bowed in unison. After saying yes, they turned and left the hall. Then 2 elders personally went to watch over the prison, strengthening the security and defense to prevent any problems from happening to the 2,000 prisoners. Chief Song He and the other 2 elders went to carry out a series of follow-up missions, mainly to spread the news of this battle. In addition, the 3,000 disciples of the Pine Crane tribe also needed to recuperate and recover to their peak state as soon as possible. Because everyone knew that the real battle had just begun. Next, the Pine Crane tribe would face greater challenges and dangers. Patriarch Pine Crane was very efficient. In just one day, the relevant news was released through various channels. It quickly spread to the surrounding regions and then to the entire Reincarnation Island. Thus, a day later, many forces and the people of the Reincarnation Island knew about it. General Mingi was very domineering and forceful. In order to force the Pine Crane race to surrender and swear allegiance, he actually sent 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and 8,000 soldiers to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Commander Mingi even gave an order to strip all the assets of the Pine Crane race. He also wanted to capture all the people of the Pine Crane race and escort them to Yudu to be beheaded in public. Of course, this news was only half true and half false. The Pine Crane race had purposely made it up in order to incite public outrage and highlight Commander Mingi's cruelty. The Pine Crane race was about to be destroyed by Commander Mingi's cruel methods. Their tens of thousands of years of inheritance would be severed. The Pine Crane clansmen who weren't willing to sit and wait for death, from the chief and elders to the old, weak women and children, united and fought back. Luckily, before the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and 8,000 soldiers arrived, the Pine Crane race had secretly contacted a few strong practitioners. Those few strong practitioners also yearned for freedom and peace. They were righteous people who weren't willing to be controlled and ordered around by Commander Mingi. They had long expected that Commander Mingi would make an example out of the Pine Crane race, so they had led thousands of elite soldiers to set up an ambush in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Thus, the battle was very intense and the result was very satisfying. Thousands of Pine Crane clansmen, along with a few other strong practitioners, led over 5,000 disciples to set up a sealing formation in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Chief Pine Crane executed a brilliant plan to lure the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and 8,000 soldiers into an ambush. Both sides started a fierce battle in the sealing formation. In the end, the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals were killed by Chief Pine Crane and the rest. The 8,000 soldiers were also completely wiped out. Not even their corpses were left behind. The Pine Crane race won the victory and protected their foundation that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. This matter also proved that Commander Mingi and Blood Prison Marshal who had ruled Reincarnation Island and bullied the people for 1,000 years weren't that scary. Only those who dared to resist and didn't fear sacrifice could defeat power and win freedom and peace. Here, the Pine Crane race appealed to the hundreds of millions of people on Reincarnation Island, as well as the thousands of sects and factions. If they didn't want to continue being slaves, they had to unite and fight back. They had to overthrow the dark rule of the god of the underworld. Similar news was spreading rapidly across the Samsara Island. The various factions and the people of Reincarnation Island who heard the news instantly exploded. They were all discussing this matter excitedly. Many people found it hard to believe. They didn't expect the Pine Crane race to be so courageous and dared to resist Commander Mingi's orders. More people were guessing who the mysterious experts who had joined forces to help the Pine Crane race were. Who were the factions behind them? Most people's first reaction was, it had to be the other 4 ancient clans. Those 4 ancient clans were the same as the Pine Crane race. They had been stalling for time and refused to surrender to Commander Mingi. It seemed that they wanted to wait for the Kenshin to arrive. Then they would swear allegiance to the Kenshin and overthrow the god of the underworld's rule. Although there was still no news from Kenshin, Commander Mingi couldn't wait any longer. He decisively attacked the Pine Crane race. Once Commander Mingi succeeded in wiping out the Pine Crane race, it would serve as a warning to the rest. Then Commander Mingi would deal with the other 4 ancient clans one by one. To prevent this from happening, the 5 ancient clans could only secretly communicate and unite. They would advance and retreat together. This was the only way to resist Commander Mingi and stall for time until the Kenshin arrived. Many factions on Reincarnation Island were secretly excited at this thought. They were looking forward to seeing how Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal would react to the 5 ancient clans' resistance. What they wanted to know was how long the 5 ancient clans could last with such a powerful force united. Just like that, the atmosphere on Reincarnation Island changed. It was calm and oppressive before a storm, but now it was bustling with noise and excitement. The commoners spread the news and mentally supported the 5 ancient clans. Although they were looking forward to Kenshin's early arrival, they knew very well that even if Kenshin came to Reincarnation Island, he would first have to subdue the 5 ancient clans. All in all, the 5 ancient clans were the main force to resist Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. On the other side, Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal were the first to receive the news. When they learned that the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and the 8,000 soldiers had been killed, they were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. They knew that the Pine Crane race was a tough nut to crack and wouldn't surrender easily. However, they didn't expect the Pine Crane race to be so unyielding and unafraid of death. Translator: Timothy Underfeder, Globeglotter. Chapter 42:17. Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal calmed down after their anger subsided. They had to consider how to deal with this matter. 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals and 8 soldiers had been killed, which was a terrible loss. However, the biggest impact on their reputation was still the people of Reincarnation Island. They didn't know how to judge and mock them. When they thought about how those lowly commoners must be laughing at them and mocking them right now, Commander Styx and Marshal Bloodhell were infuriated. However, the problem had to be solved and the truth had to be investigated. Since the Pine Crane race dared to release this news and the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals couldn't be contacted, it proved that the 8,000 soldiers had indeed been ambushed. As for whether anyone was lucky enough to escape, it would take time to prove it. When Commander Mingi received the news, he immediately sent his soldiers to contact the soldiers who were still alive. From the 4 Reincarnation Divine Generals to the 8,000 soldiers, they had to try to contact them and find out the truth. Unfortunately, 2 days had passed and not a single soldier could be contacted. The 8,000 soldiers seemed to have been completely wiped out. There was no news at all. Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal had to accept this fact and discuss the next step of the plan. Both of them were powerful people. For the past 1,000 years, the god of the underworld hadn't been on Reincarnation Island. They were the actual controllers of Reincarnation Island, the people with the highest authority. The small Pine Crane race dared to be so arrogant. This battle was like a slap to their faces. The most important thing now was to find a way to fight back and destroy the Pine Crane race with lightning speed. Only then could they save face and intimidate the many forces and people of Reincarnation Island. Thus, Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal gathered many divine generals, region lords and divine kings to discuss the plan in the meeting hall. Of course, their so-called discussion was actually just Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal giving orders, and the various divine generals and domain lords filling in some details. After a short hour, the meeting ended. The result of the discussion was also within everyone's expectations. Commander Mingi was still in Yudu, leading 50,000 soldiers to protect the capital. The Blood Hell Marshal personally led 18,000 elite soldiers to exterminate the Pine Crane tribe. In everyone's opinion, these 18,000 soldiers were enough to deal with the main forces of the 5 ancient clans. However, to be on the safe side, Commander Mingi also sent out the Hidden Killer Group to secretly assist the Blood Hell Marshal. The Assassin Group was a sharp blade under the personal control of Commander Mingi. It specialized in gathering information and assassinating, and it was formed from over 1,000 top-rate assassins. Under normal circumstances, half of the assassins would be active outside to monitor the situation on the Samsara island. The 500 assassins of Hidden Death Squad that were on standby in Yudu were transferred by Commander Mingi to Martial Blood Prison to cooperate with him in his revenge operation. To Commander Mingi, this battle wasn't just revenge. It was also a final warning to the 5 ancient clans. As long as they won this battle and destroyed the Pine Crane tribe, the situation on Reincarnation Island would be stabilized. Even if Kenshin came to Reincarnation Island, the remaining 4 ancient clans wouldn't dare act rashly. Therefore they could only win this battle and not lose. At dawn the next day, Martial Blood Prison led the 18,000 soldiers and set off on 9 divine ships. The 500 assassins of Hidden Killer Group had secretly left Yudu a few hours ago to rush to the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. They had to act as scouts and gather information at the front lines. They also had to carry out assassination missions and assassinate targets. Silently, the Pine Crane tribe was engulfed in killing and danger. The entire Reincarnation Island was discussing whether the 5 ancient clans could resist the counterattack of Commander Mingi and Martial Blood Prison if they worked together. The 4 ancient clans who were the parties were stunned. No matter what the outside world said and discussed, they knew that this matter had nothing to do with them. Even though they had expected Commander Mingi to attack the Pine Crane tribe. However, they didn't get any information and didn't know when Commander Mingi would make his move. As for secretly helping the Pine Crane tribe and working with them to destroy the army of 8,000, that was even more ridiculous. When the 4 ancient clans received the news, they were all shocked. Their first reaction was to immediately make an announcement to clarify the truth and cut ties with the Pine Crane tribe. After all, Kenshin hadn't come to Reincarnation Island yet. They didn't want to fall out with Commander Mingi and become enemies. The rumors in the outside world would tie them to the Pine Crane tribe and declare war on Commander Mingi. However, the elders and chiefs of the 4 ancient clans quickly calmed down and temporarily dispelled the idea of clarifying the truth. First of all, the people of Reincarnation Island were very supportive of the alliance between the 5 ancient clans to fight against Nether River Commander. Billions of people saw the 5 ancient clans as heroes and saviors. They placed their hopes of freedom on them. The 4 ancient clans didn't do anything to win the hearts of the people. This was a good thing. The second reason was that the experts of the 4 ancient clans all felt that there was something fishy about this matter. They knew the Pine Crane tribe's background. Even if they set up an ambush in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, it was impossible for them to wipe out the 4 reincarnation divine generals and 8,000 soldiers. Therefore, a mysterious strong practitioner must have helped the Pine Crane tribe. However, the mysterious strong practitioner wasn't them. It was someone else. What the 4 ancient clans wanted to know the most was who the mysterious strong practitioner was. Looking at the entire Reincarnation Island, it seemed that other than the 4 ancient clans, no other force had the qualifications and courage to secretly help the Pine Crane tribe. Some of the more imaginative elders and deacons of the 4 ancient clans couldn't help but wonder if Kenshin had come. Although this guess was slightly absurd, it wasn't impossible. It immediately aroused everyone's curiosity and anticipation. Therefore, the 4 ancient clans sent out spies to investigate the Pine Crane tribe and find out about the mysterious strong practitioner. In the end, the spies didn't find anything after 2 days. The 4 ancient clans couldn't sit still and had to send a message to the Pine Crane tribe leader directly. After all, they had already boarded the pirate ship and were bound to the Pine Crane tribe. They were forced to become allies. It was fine to send a private message and ask about it. If the Pine Crane tribe was sincere about cooperating, they would probably tell the truth. Inside the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, the Pine Crane tribe leader had already arranged a residence for Ji Tianxing. It was an inconspicuous but very luxurious and comfortable residence. For the past few days, Ji Tianxing had been meditating and cultivating in his residence. Apart from the Pine Crane tribe leader and a few elders, no one else came to disturb him. Naturally, his identity was kept a secret and wouldn't be leaked. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 42:18. It was early in the morning. The exquisite and elegant house was very quiet, and the fragrance of flowers filled the air. Patriarch Song he brought 2 elders with him to pay respects to Ji Tianxing and report the news to him. They met in the study. Ji Tianxing sat on an exquisite purple jade chair and drank tea leisurely. Patriarch Song He and the two elders stood respectfully. After saluting him, they reported, "Lord Kenshin, as you expected, the entire Reincarnation Island is in an uproar after the news spread. Now all the people believe that the other four clans have allied with us. The four ancient clans didn't come out to deny or clarify, which means that their thoughts are just as you expected. Also, last night the patriarchs of the four ancient clans sent me messages one after another, asking me about your identity. I didn't dare to make a decision on my own, so I came to ask you." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said indifferently, "Looking at the entire Reincarnation Island, which force or expert can help the Song He clan now? As long as the four ancient clans aren't stupid, they'll definitely suspect that I'm here to secretly help the Song He clan. They're not in a hurry to clarify the truth, but they sent you a message first. This proves that they do have thoughts of rebelling against the god of the underworld. Since that's the case, tell them the truth but ask them to keep it a secret. If anyone divulges any information or leaks any information, I will definitely punish them severely." Patriarch Song He nodded with a smile and said, "Understood. I'll reply to them later. I believe that they know that Lord Kenshin is here, so they'll definitely rush over to pledge their loyalty to you as soon as possible." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and a playful smile appeared on his lips. He said, "It's true that they'll rush over as soon as possible, but it might not necessarily be to pledge their loyalty to me. It's also possible that they're here to negotiate and ask for conditions and benefits." The smile on Patriarch Song He's face froze and he said awkwardly, "Lord Kenshin, you're overthinking. Everyone knows that those who join the Rebel Alliance and follow you through life and death have received the benefits and rewards they deserve. The patriarchs of the four clans shouldn't." Not waiting for him to finish, Ji Tianxing looked at him with a smile and asked, "When this king came to ancient Pine Grotto, I directly made you swear an oath of surrender. Until now, I have not promised you any treatment or benefits. Don't tell me you've never felt uneasy? Don't you want to ask for anything from me?" Upon hearing this, Patriarch Song He hurriedly bowed and said respectfully, "Lord Kenshin, this subordinate is sincerely loyal to you. I am willing to contribute my strength to save the people of Reincarnation Island. I do not dare to ask for any treatment or conditions. Furthermore, I have absolute trust in your character and character. This subordinate believes that as long as the Pine Crane clan follows orders and fights to the death, you definitely won't let our clansmen's blood flow in vain. Therefore, your subordinate does not dare and will not raise any conditions or requests from you." The two elders hurriedly chimed in, expressing the same sentiment. In short, the Pine Crane race's attitude was quite good. Their words were extremely beautiful. In fact, only 80% of these words were true. There was no other way. Patriarch Song He had already sworn an oath of surrender. Even if Kenshin did not give him any benefits, the Pine Crane race still had to follow orders and serve Kenshin with their lives. Moreover, Kenshin had already helped the Pine Crane race kill the 4 reincarnation divine generals and eliminate the 8,000 soldiers. This was already a great help and saved the Pine Crane race's fate. Ji Tianxing was very satisfied with Patriarch Song He's performance. He nodded and said, You're quite sensible and sensible. You're much more tactful than the ancient clans of the boundless heaven continent. Of course, the war has only just begun. We haven't won and captured Reincarnation Island yet. Any treatment or conditions you talk about now are fake. You must also guard against arrogance and rashness. Do your work in a down-to-earth manner." Patriarch Song He and the two elders were secretly delighted to receive Kenshin's recognition and praise. They hurriedly bowed and said they understood. Then Ji Tianxing asked, "What's the current situation of the 2,500 captives?" Patriarch Song He answered truthfully, "There are 4 elders and 12 deacons leading more than 1,000 disciples to watch over them day and night. There's no problem at the moment. They don't have a chance to report and their emotions are very stable. However, I can see that they still have hope for Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. They're waiting for Commander Mingi to come and save them." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said, "We can't keep these 2,500 captives like this. It'll waste our forces for nothing. However, we can't slaughter the captives either. That's too cruel. How about this? Follow me to the prison and take those captives for our own use. In the future, when we fight Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal, we'll send them to the battlefield and let them redeem themselves. I'm sure they'll be happy to fight for their freedom." Patriarch Song He and the two elders' eyes lit up. They hurriedly nodded and applauded. In the past 2 days, Patriarch Song He had also considered how to deal with the captives. There were more than 2,000 captives. At least 1,000 Pine Crane disciples were needed to watch over them strictly. This would greatly weaken the military strength of his side. They couldn't kill or release the captives. It was best to take them for their own use. However, the loyalty of the captives wasn't guaranteed. Thus, the Pine Crane clan didn't dare to use them. Since Kenshin had spoken, he definitely had enough confidence. Thus, Patriarch Song He and the two elders took the invisible Ji Tianxing and quietly rushed to the prison. The huge prison was in the depths of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. It was in a canyon surrounded by mountains and was sealed by layers of formations. After Ji Tianxing and Patriarch Song He arrived, they withdrew all the Pine Crane disciples and deacons, leaving only a few elders behind. Seeing that more than 1,000 people had withdrawn, the 2,000 captives began to become restless. They thought they had a chance to escape. Some people were discussing whether something had happened. Did Commander Mingi come to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven? Some people even tried to send a communication jade slip to inform Commander Mingi. However, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a few rays of divine light. They condensed into a light shield and instantly suppressed all the captives. He removed his invisible state and appeared in front of the captives. When the captives saw his appearance, someone immediately cried out in alarm and revealed his identity. Kenshin. This is Kenshin. Kenshin actually came? Suddenly, more than 2,500 captives were stunned. They looked at Ji Tianxing with awe and shock. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time. He waved his hand and shot out a ray of white light. It condensed into a huge light screen in midair. Dense golden words appeared on the white light screen. There were more than 500 words. If one looked closely, they would find that it was a simplified version of the Pledge of Surrender. It was specially prepared for these captives. Everyone, read this Pledge of Surrender and pledge your loyalty to me. Only then will you have the chance to redeem your crimes and regain your freedom. Those who refuse to surrender will be executed without mercy. Ji Tianxing looked at the captives expressionlessly and ordered indifferently. All the captives were dumbfounded. Chapter 42:19. With more than 2,500 captives, they originally thought that Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal would definitely lead their troops to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. After all, the defeat in the previous battle had severely humiliated Commander Mingi and the Blood Prison Marshal. They would definitely seek revenge. When Commander Mingi's army breached ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, these captives could be reborn. However, they did not expect the Pine Crane clan to be so cunning. Not only did they lock them up for a few days, but they were also strictly guarded and were not allowed to leak any information. Today, the Pine Crane clan disciples guarding them had finally left with great difficulty, but an even more terrifying figure had arrived. The famous sword god whose might shook the entire god realm, had actually appeared in ancient Pine Grotto. This news was simply too shocking. It was simply too hard to believe. The captives finally understood. No wonder the Pine Crane clan could set up such a marvelous array outside ancient Pine Grotto Heaven in just a few hours. It was no wonder that a mysterious expert had killed the 4 reincarnation divine generals in seconds with just 2 moves. No wonder their 8,000 elite soldiers had been defeated so quickly and in such a muddle-headed manner. It turned out that they had been defeated by Kenshin. The answer was finally revealed. The captives were suddenly enlightened and felt a sense of relief in their hearts. After all, they had been defeated by the world-renowned Kenshin. It was not an unjust loss. However, after this thought flashed through their minds, they had no choice but to face the cruel reality. Kenshin's methods were indeed ruthless. As soon as he appeared, he threw out the Pledge of Surrender and forced everyone to read it on the spot. Once the pledge was read, they had to be loyal to Kenshin. They could not do anything that would harm Kenshin's interests and safety. Otherwise, they would be punished by the heavens. Although this was only a legend, the legend passed down from the boundless heaven continent described the Pledge of Surrender made by Kenshin as extremely terrifying. However, these captives believed that it was not an alarmist story. Kenshin definitely had the ability to do so. If anyone was unwilling to read the Pledge of Surrender, Kenshin would immediately kill them. Therefore, there were only 2 choices in front of the 2,000 captives. Either obediently swear allegiance to Kenshin or be killed by Kenshin. As for escaping, these captives did not even dare to think about it. Escape from Kenshin's eyes? What kind of joke was this? Even if the Blood Hell Marshal and Commander Styx were here, they wouldn't be able to do it. Therefore the prison was very quiet. More than 2,000 captives looked at each other and stood there silently. None of them said a word. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Patriarch Song He quickly stepped forward and reprimanded the captives on behalf of Ji Tianxing. You bastards, Lord Kenshin is kind and merciful. He spared your lives and even gave you a chance to turn over a new leaf. Why aren't you bowing and thanking him? All of them stood rooted to the ground. Were they tired of living? If you want to die, I'm more than happy to fulfill your wish. After saying that, Patriarch Song He pulled out his divine sword with a clang, and his whole body emitted a terrifying killing intent. This move was indeed effective. The 2,000 captives who had been silent immediately grew restless. They burst out suppressed exclamations, complaints, and curses. But in the face of the threat of death, they had no choice but to submit. The 100 captives standing at the front could only look up at the white light screen and start reading the golden words on the screen. A low and solemn voice sounded. After someone took the lead, more captives immediately followed and read the oath of surrender. The feeling of defeat and helplessness was contagious. More and more captives gave up their unrealistic fantasies and could only submit to reality and join the ranks of those who read the oath. Patriarch Song He and the other elders sneered when they saw this. However, there was no lack of hot-blooded and brave warriors among the 2,500 captives. There were actually 2 lower-rank god kings. While Patriarch Song He and the others let down their guard, they secretly took out their communication jade slips and wanted to send a message to Commander Styx. Kenshin had actually come to Reincarnation Island. This was an earth-shattering piece of top-secret news. They had to report it to Commander Styx at all costs. Otherwise, Commander Styx and the Blood Hell Marshal would definitely suffer heavy losses when they were unprepared. Unfortunately, no matter how stealthy the 2 lower-rank God Kings' actions were, they could not escape Ji Tianxing's detection and surveillance. The 2 of them had just taken out their communication jade slips. Before they could enter the message, they saw Ji Tianxing waving his hand and shooting out 2 rays of sword light. Whoosh! Whoosh! The golden sword light flashed and disappeared. It sank into the crowd and caused 2 splashes of blood. The 2 lower-rank God Kings did not even have time to react before they were killed on the spot. The sword light pierced through their heads and shattered their god heads. It was truly a one-hit kill. The sudden bloody light and the sound of the 2 God Kings' bodies falling to the ground gave the 2,000 captives a fright. As a result, everyone who was reading the oath of surrender paused for a moment. After understanding what was going on, the captives could not help but tremble a few times. Originally, there were a few people who wanted to take advantage of the chaos to send a message to the Blood Hell Marshal. The moment they saw the tragic end of the 2 God Kings and witnessed Kenshin's ruthless methods, they all dismissed the idea and obediently read the oath of surrender. With this small interlude, all the captives became very well behaved and did not dare to play any tricks anymore. 15 minutes later, more than 2,530 people finished reading the oath of surrender. Everyone was surrounded by divine light. There was a wisp of Daoist rhyme circling above their heads. There were even waves of thunder rumbling in the depths of the firmament. It did not dissipate for a long time. There were 2 crafty captives who only recited half of the oath of surrender. Hence, the heavenly Dao oath did not take effect. The others were emitting divine light all over. Daoist rhymes circled above their heads. But the 2 of them did not have any changes. They appeared like cranes in a flock of chickens and were very conspicuous. Seeing this scene, the 2 captives were so frightened that their faces turned pale. They were afraid that 2 rays of sword light would fly over in the next moment and kill the 2 of them. Hence, the 2 of them hurriedly recited the second half of the oath of surrender. Until the 2 of them were also emitting divine light all over their bodies and Daoist rhyme appeared above their heads, the heavenly Dao oath was established. Only then did they heave a sigh of relief. Just like that, all the captives finished reciting the oath of surrender. The white light screen and the golden words gradually dissipated. Ji Tianxing told Patriarch Song He that there was no need to send people to watch over these captives. Let these captives rest and recuperate first. When the war required, they could be mobilized at any time. After saying that, he turned and left the prison. Patriarch Song He was a little worried. He reminded the 2,000 captives again before turning and leaving. However, he still left 3 elders behind to secretly monitor the captives. As expected, after Xianxia and Patriarch Song He left, a few of the captives began to move. They secretly took out their communication jade slips. They would rather die than report the news of Kenshin's appearance to Commander Styx. Chapter 42:20. These captives were very loyal to Commander Acheron and the god of the underworld. They were known as Death Warriors. In their minds, as long as they could spread the news that Kenshin had come to Reincarnation Island and let Commander Acheron and the Blood Prison Marshal be on guard, their deaths would be worth it. Using their lives in exchange for this important news and delivering it to Commander Acheron was absolutely worth it. Moreover, Kenshin and Patriarch Song He had already left. There was no one guarding the prison, nor was there anyone watching over it. The 2,000 captives were all free. These captives still harbored some hope that if they were not discovered by Kenshin and Patriarch Song He, they would not be executed. However, something unbelievable and horrifying happened. Right when the 5 captives were inputting messages into the communication jade chip, a deafening clap of thunder suddenly burst out in the originally quiet and dim prison. Boom. In that instant, 5 pillars of lightning appeared out of thin air in the prison. Like sharp swords that could split heaven and earth, they descended from the sky and struck the 5 captives. Each pillar of lightning was as thick as a bowl and over 100 feet long. They were completely purple and black, containing a terrifying heavenly might. In a quarter of an instant, the 5 captives were struck by the pillars of lightning before they could react. Bang! Bang bang! In the deafening sound, the 5 captives were struck into charcoal on the spot, turning into a pile of black ash that splashed everywhere. The ground where they stood was also struck by the lightning. It was as dark as a well, with black smoke rising in spirals. The captives around them, who were very close to the pillars of lightning, were unharmed. From this, one could see how fast and accurate the pillars of lightning were. The muffled sound was still echoing in the prison. More than 2,000 captives were dumbfounded. They were all dumbfounded, and their eyes were wide open and their mouths were aghast. A moment later, someone finally reacted and let out a series of exclamations. It's heavenly punishment. The legend is true. The oath we made to the heavenly Tao is really being watched by the heavenly Tao. It's too terrifying. Those 5 brothers only wanted to send a message to the Grand Commander, but they were struck into ashes before they could even send a message. No wonder those heavenly anomalies appeared after we recited the oath of surrender. It turns out that we are really being monitored and restricted by the heavenly Tao. Those 5 brothers were basically all high divine lords, but they couldn't react at all and were instantly killed by the heavenly lightning. The might of heavenly punishment is so terrifying. It's over. After we recited the oath of surrender, we were completely tied up by the Kenshin. We didn't even dare to think of resisting. Yes. Those 5 brothers had just taken out their jade slips, but before they could send out a message, they were struck to death by heavenly lightning. Bless. No wonder Kenshin was so confident. He turned around and left after we swore the oath of surrender. He wasn't worried about us escaping at all. The prison became restless and chaotic. More than 2,000 people exclaimed in surprise and started to discuss in whispers. Their faces were extremely unsightly. The 5 captives were reduced to ashes by the heavenly lightning, which also proved that the heavenly oath was effective. Just as everyone had guessed, after the oath was established, the heavenly Tao had been monitoring everyone at all times. The moment anyone had any thoughts of betrayal and took action, they would immediately be punished by heavenly punishment. There was absolutely no luck. As such, more than 2,000 captives were scared witless. Many of them didn't even dare to think of resisting. After a full 15 minutes, the crowd gradually quietened down. More than 2,000 captives also became well-behaved. They each found a place to sit down and began to circulate their energy to regulate their breathing and heal their injuries. Since fate had already decided that they couldn't betray Kenshin, then under the circumstances where they didn't want to die, they could only silently endure and do as they were told. Just as Kenshin had said, they could still be of use in the future. They could even atone for their crimes by meritorious service and have a chance to regain their freedom. The 3 pine crane elders who were hiding in the dark to observe the situation were still somewhat fearful at first. When they saw the 5 captives taking out their jade slips and preparing to send a message, they almost couldn't help but jump out to stop them. But before they were ready, those 5 captives were struck to death by the heavenly lightning. They were also dumbfounded, their hearts filled with shock and awe. When the image of Kenshin's back appeared in their minds again, it became even taller, more majestic and more sacred. After waiting for about 15 minutes, they saw that more than 2,000 captives had quietened down and were obediently circulating their energy to heal their injuries. Only then did they leave quietly. After leaving the prison, the three elders went to report the situation to their patriarch with excitement. Half an hour later, the three elders entered Patriarch Pine Crane's study and fought to be the first to describe what had happened, vividly describing what had happened. When Patriarch Pine Crane heard that the 5 captives took out their jade slips to send a message to Commander Mingi, he was also full of worry and his heart was in his throat. When he heard that the 5 captives were struck to ashes by the heavenly lightning before they could send a message, he was also full of shock and disbelief. While he was shocked and excited, he also secretly rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. After all, he was also someone who had taken the oath of surrender and was constantly under the surveillance of the heavenly law. Fortunately, he didn't resist Kenshin or have any thoughts of harming Kenshin, let alone take action. Otherwise, he would have been struck to ashes by the heavenly lightning without any chance of survival. After the 3 elders finished, he let out a long breath and couldn't help but sigh. Kenshin is really a god. I can't see through him. Even the heavenly law is for him, helping him to monitor the captives and subjects. It's incredible. Even the 5 god emperors can't do such a thing. Could it be that, as Kenshin said, the 5 god emperors are treacherous, evil and cruel, and he is the embodiment of justice, the messenger of the heavenly law? The 3 elders looked at each other with a somewhat complicated expression. Their eyes were full of awe, but they didn't speak. Although Patriarch Pine Crane's sigh and speculation sounded ridiculous, the 3 elders didn't laugh at it. However, the 3 elders did not find it laughable. Instead, they found it very believable. In a flash, 3 days passed. The Reincarnation Island was still in turmoil. Hundreds of millions of people were still talking about the war between the 5 ancient clans and Commander Mingi. 500 assassins of the Hidden Death Group had already stepped into the border of the Cypress Pine region ahead of the army. They were the advance team and had to enter the Cypress Pine region first to fully investigate the Pine Crane clan's background. The 18,000 troops led by the Blood Prison Marshal were still riding on 9 divine warships toward the Cypress Pine region at a moderate speed. They could also enter the Cypress Pine region in 12 hours at the latest. On the other side, ancient Pine Grotto Heaven also welcomed a few mysterious guests. Even though these god kings had not come together and had arrived one after another, they had all arrived. Moreover, each of them had disguised themselves to hide their true identity and appearance. However, their arrival had long been expected by Ji Tianxing and Patriarch Pine Crane. Therefore their identities were not mysterious. Chapter 42-21. The guards guarding the entrance to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven promptly reported the situation to Patriarch Pine Crane and asked for instructions on how to deal with the situation. Patriarch Pine Crane guessed that the person they were waiting for had arrived when he heard the description of the guards. He immediately ordered them to be let in. As for the experts who had arrived at ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, they were led by the Pine Crane guards to the meeting hall after entering the Grotto Heaven. The attitude of the Pine Crane clan was neither warm nor indifferent. It was neither warm nor distant. In short, they let the experts wait in the meeting hall first. After serving them tea and fruits, they waited patiently. The experts who had arrived first saw the arrogant attitude of the Pine Crane clan and felt uncomfortable, but they did not dare to act out. After all, their visit to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven was of great significance. Their mission was sacred and difficult. Before they met that world-renowned expert, they could tolerate any form of contempt and neglect. As time passed quietly, the tea in front of the experts was refilled after they drank it. When it was cold, they reheated it again. After a full 6 hours, the 8 experts of the 4 forces had all arrived. They sat on the large chairs on the left and right sides. They all looked at each other with tacit understanding. Although everyone had disguised themselves and covered their faces, they were too familiar with each other. They could recognize each other even with their eyes closed. Finally, someone could not help but speak. I was the first to arrive. I waited for a full 6 hours. Not only did Song Hetao not show up, but even the elders of the Pine Crane clan could not be seen. The Pine Crane clan is so arrogant now. How dare they neglect us? Humph. After saying that, the patriarch snorted coldly. The other 2 patriarchs had the same idea. but their reactions were not as intense. They shook their heads with smiles. Brother Qianlong, you're wrong. We all know that the old man Song Hetao is rather stubborn. He's a stubborn man. With his personality, he might not do such an arrogant act to humiliate us. That's right. Maybe Song Hetao just wants to wait for us to arrive before meeting and discussing with everyone. This is more appropriate. If someone came first and someone else came later, and Song Hetao met them separately for a secret talk, wouldn't we be at odds with each other and suspect each other? Even though the two clan leaders were somewhat dissatisfied with the Pine Crane race's cold response, they were still quite dissatisfied with the Pine Crane race. However, they were smarter and more tactful, so they would definitely not reveal the dissatisfaction in their hearts. This was because they were on guard against Patriarch Song He observing them from the shadows. What was even more frightening was that if Kenshin was really in the ancient Pine Grotto, then he would already be watching them from the shadows. Rashly placing the Pine Crane tribe chief would inevitably provoke Kenshin's displeasure. Anyway, the Kenshin had already subdued the Pine Crane tribe. Song Hetao was more fortunate as he was the first to submit to the Kenshin, so he would definitely be highly regarded. They could only be envious and jealous, but there was nothing they could do. All he could do was to be more meticulous and try his best to please Kenshin. On the surface, the four clans seemed to be harmonious, but they all had their own thoughts and plans. None of the leaders of the ancient clans were easy to deal with. After arguing for a while, the three patriarchs calmed their anger and waited patiently. Meanwhile, Patriarch Song He had already gone to Ji Tianxing's residence to ask for instructions in person. In the study, Patriarch Song He bowed slightly and respectfully said, "Reporting to Sir Kenshin, the patriarchs of the four clans have each brought an elder into the conference hall. Look, they're all here. Can we?" At this point, Patriarch Song He stopped talking and quietly looked at Ji Tianxing, waiting for him to make a decision. Ji Tianxing was reclining on an armchair, flipping through an ancient scroll. Hearing this, he put down the simple and yellow scroll, rubbed his chin and said with an indifferent expression, "Some of them have been waiting for 6 hours, so they must have some resentment in their hearts. Since that's the case, let's let them drink tea for another 6 hours to cool down." But Patriarch Song He was stunned and looked at Ji Tianxing with a puzzled expression, saying, "Sir Kenshin, this isn't very good, is it? Besides, they know you're here. So what if they wait for 6 hours? They definitely won't dare to have any resentment towards you." Ji Tianxing glanced at him and asked with a smile, "They still aren't sure whether I'm an ancient pine paradise or not, so how could they have any resentment towards me? You, on the other hand, can apologize to them when you see them later. Otherwise, they will definitely slander you behind your back." Patriarch Song He was stunned for a moment, but he immediately understood what he meant and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Thank you for your reminder, Sir Kenshin. This old man didn't intend to neglect or make things difficult for them. I just wanted to wait for them to arrive and then meet them to discuss things together. Only then would it be fair. This old man didn't think too much and didn't think that it would have such an effect." Indeed, with Kenshin overseeing ancient Pine Paradise, how could Patriarch Song He dare to act unscrupulously and make things difficult for and humiliate the patriarchs of the four ancient clans? He would only be more cautious when handling matters and considering problems, for fear of making a mistake that would affect Kenshin's plan. However, he had neglected the psychological reactions of the four patriarchs and only understood the key point after Kenshin's reminder. However, Kenshin had just said that the four patriarchs should wait for 6 hours. Wasn't this deliberately making things difficult and neglecting them? Patriarch Song He couldn't refute it, let alone disobey the order. He still had to take the blame for Kenshin and bear the resentment of the four clans. The four clans couldn't afford to offend Kenshin, but couldn't they afford to offend him? Thus he could only smile bitterly. Ji Tianxing no longer paid attention to him and continued to read the ancient scroll. Patriarch Song He felt awkward staying in the study and couldn't find anything to do. Thus he bid farewell to Ji Tianxing and left the study. After walking out of Ji Tianxing's residence, Patriarch Song He recalled Ji Tianxing's reminder and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. That's right, Sir Kenshin told them to wait for 6 hours before showing up, but he didn't say that I can't go see them. I can go and explain to those old fellows first so that they won't blame me. When the time comes for them to form an alliance, they'll join forces to make things difficult for me. Based on the current situation, Patriarch Song He felt that Kenshin was the first to subdue him and would definitely value him the most. After Kenshin subdued the other 4 clans, the rebel alliance would be officially established. At that time, Patriarch Song He would definitely be the leader of the 5 clans. In other words, Kenshin would have to go to other continents after conquering Reincarnation Island. In that case, Reincarnation Island would most likely be handed over to him to manage. However, if the other 4 clans joined forces to trap him and deliberately resist him, then it would be hard to say. For Kenshin, stability and efficiency were the most important. For the sake of the overall situation, it was natural to sacrifice him, Patriarch Song He. Thinking of this, Patriarch Song He shuddered and hurried to the conference hall. Chapter 42-22. Master Kenshin was right. As soon as he entered the meeting hall, Patriarch Song He felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were all in disguise. On the surface they seemed to be drinking tea, resting with their eyes closed and waiting patiently. But in fact, everyone's eyes were filled with impatience and dissatisfaction. Especially the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan, who was the most straightforward and hot-tempered guy. He almost had a black face. Seeing this scene, Patriarch Song He stepped into the hall and laughed heartily. Nobody knew when it started, but there was an unwritten rule on the Reincarnation Island. When the various forces and experts met, they had to laugh and greet each other. The longer they laughed, the less hostile they were, and the more they asked the other party to rest assured. Therefore, Patriarch Song He laughed for more than 10 breaths without taking a breath. As he laughed, he glanced at the powerhouses with a smile on his face and nodded in greeting to the 4 clan leaders. The scene looked a bit strange. When the experts of the 4 clans saw that Patriarch Song He had finally appeared, their impatience and resentment finally dissipated. They all stood up and focused their gazes on Patriarch Song He. All of them revealed friendly smiles. Only the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan frowned and asked in a deep voice, "Song Hetao, what the hell are you doing? Are you deliberately mystifying things?" Patriarch Song He was not angry in the face of his question, and he still maintained his smile. He walked to the front of the throne, then turned to look at the crowd and explained, "Patriarchs, this old man knows that you've been waiting here for 4 to 6 hours and you're a bit anxious. After all, you all want to see that lord as soon as possible, and this old man can understand your feelings. But please understand that this old man must wait for all of you to arrive before we can talk openly. Otherwise, those who arrive later will suspect that this old man is colluding with those who arrive first. Don't you think so?" When the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan complained before, Patriarch Zhou Xian also said the same thing, so everyone understood this reason, and the patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan could not make trouble again. However, he was still indignant and said in a deep voice, "Now that everyone is here, shouldn't we get down to business?" Patriarch Song He nodded and said, "Since the misunderstanding has been resolved, this old man hopes that everyone can discuss this matter peacefully. After all, we have the same situation and goal. In the eyes of the millions of people on the Samsara Island, we are allies. Therefore, this old man would like to remind all of you." At this point, he deliberately paused to observe the reactions of the 4 patriarchs. The 4 clan leaders didn't object to his words. They only urged him, seeming a little impatient and expectant. "That's enough, Patriarch Song He. Stop keeping us in suspense. What do you want to remind me of? Just say it." Patriarch Song He stroked his beard and said in a neither fast nor slow manner, "The lord that everyone wants to see is currently in the ancient pine grotto. Everyone will be able to see him soon. But you should also understand how noble that lord's status is and how powerful his methods are. If you have any unrealistic ideas, you should dispel them as soon as possible. In addition, everyone should be more respectful to that lord. Most importantly, that lord thinks highly of our efficiency and ability. Therefore, it's best that we don't waste time arguing over such trivial matters. If we really want to form an alliance and work together, it's better for us to work together and do our best." These were Patriarch Song He's heartfelt words. Of course, he hoped that the 4 clans could behave themselves and not cause any trouble. The 4 clan leaders might not agree with these words, nor would they pay too much attention to Patriarch Song He. However, in front of Patriarch Song He, especially before they saw Kenshin himself, they certainly wouldn't show any dissatisfaction. The 4 clan leaders nodded repeatedly to show their agreement and echoed Patriarch Song He's words. After a series of hypocritical pleasantries, the Hidden Dragon clan leader couldn't wait to ask, "Patriarch Song He, since we've been frank and honest, There's no awkwardness or misunderstanding. Then, can you ask that Lord to come out so that we can meet him face to face? Patriarch Song He looked at him with a smile and said, I'm afraid you've forgotten that you haven't recovered your original faces yet. How can you be frank and honest? The hidden dragon clan leader was embarrassed and quickly removed his disguise. The other 3 clan leaders also smiled embarrassedly and quickly removed their divine abilities and secret techniques to restore their original faces. After the 4 clan leaders removed their disguises, the 4 elders standing behind them also restored their original faces. Therefore, the atmosphere in the main hall was much more relaxed. The elders looked at each other and smiled, hiding the awkwardness in their hearts. In contrast, the hidden dragon clan leader, who was younger, was a burly middle-aged man with a full beard. He was a typical boorish man. He asked again, Song He Tao, is it all right now? Go and ask that Lord to come out. Patriarch Song He still looked at him with a smile and explained, You must be joking, hidden dragon clan leader. I'm only that Lord's subordinate and servant. How would I dare to make a decision on my own? Moreover, that Lord is dealing with some matters and will need 4 to 6 hours to complete them. Everyone has waited for a few months, so we're not in a hurry. Don't be impatient and wait patiently for a while. The 4 clan leaders were somewhat disappointed by this explanation. They did not believe Patriarch Song He's words. However, they were not the host and had never seen that Lord in person. They could not invite him themselves, could they? Even if they guessed that Patriarch Song He was manipulating them, they could only swallow their anger and silently sit down to drink tea. The main hall was silent again. In order to show his sincerity, Patriarch Song He also sat down to drink tea and chat with everyone. However, the clan leaders were not in a good mood and did not bother to respond. Therefore, after a few awkward words, Patriarch Song He simply shut his mouth and did not speak. As time passed, the clan leaders became more and more anxious. They were more and more terrified of Patriarch Song He's cunning old fox and Kenshin's shrewdness. They also understood that this was not Patriarch Song He's idea. Kenshin must have deliberately left them hanging to dampen their spirits. However, they could only pretend to be confused. How would they dare to express their dissatisfaction with Kenshin? 2 hours passed and the 4 clan leaders were full of irritation and resentment. 4 hours later, the resentment of the 4 clan leaders gradually subsided. After calming down, they began to carefully ponder Kenshin's intentions. Before coming to ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, they had already decided on how to negotiate with Kenshin, what conditions and benefits to reach. But now, after 3 hours of calming down, their spirits had been dampened again and again, and their willpower was somewhat shaken. Recalling Patriarch Song He's reminder, they gradually understood the reality. They had prayed for Kenshin's protection and wanted to follow Kenshin to overthrow the god of the underworld's rule and become the ruler of Reincarnation Island. Therefore, they did not seem to be qualified to negotiate with Kenshin. Chapter 42-23. When the 4 patriarchs calmed down and began to reflect, Ji Tianqing had achieved his goal. The reason why he deliberately left the 4 patriarchs in the main hall and delayed the meeting for 6 hours was to avoid unnecessary disputes and trouble. It was obvious that the 4 patriarchs would not be like Patriarch Song He, who bowed to him as soon as they met and pledged their loyalty without asking about the conditions and benefits. However, Ji Tianqing could not promise the 4 patriarchs anything, and he was too lazy to waste his breath. Therefore he came up with this plan. As it turned out, this method was quite useful. 6 hours had passed and the tea in front of the 4 patriarchs was already cold. However, they were no longer as impatient as before and their emotions were much calmer. The hidden dragon patriarch, who was the most straightforward and hot-tempered one, no longer wanted to be the first one to stand out and chose to remain silent. Another white-haired old man, the Fong patriarch, stroked his beard and asked, Patriarch Song He, 6 hours have passed, what do you think? Patriarch Song He also knew that the time had come to invite Kenshin to appear. Therefore he cupped his fists at the patriarchs and said, Please wait for a moment, this old man will go and meet that lord now. After that he quickly left the main hall and rushed to Ji Tianqing's residence. After arriving at the residence he entered the study and saw Ji Tianqing was still flipping through the ancient scroll. He bowed and asked, Lord Kenshin, 6 hours have passed. Ji Tianqing closed the scroll and turned to look at him. He asked, How are the 4 patriarchs now? Are their emotions still stable? Patriarch Song He replied with a smile, Just as you said, they've waited for 6 hours and all their anger and resentment have disappeared. They've all calmed down and are much calmer now. Alright, let's go then. Ji Tianxing smiled, put down the ancient scroll in his hand and got up to leave the study. In order to keep it a secret, he remained invisible during the process of going to the main hall. He only revealed himself when he entered the main hall. He took the lead and stepped into the main hall, followed by Patriarch Song He. Immediately, the gazes of the 4 patriarchs who were waiting eagerly in the hall all gathered on him. The 4 leaders all stood up subconsciously, looking at Ji Tianxing with curiosity and reverence. As for Patriarch Song He, who was standing behind Ji Tianxing, they completely ignored him. Ji Tianxing calmly walked through the hall and sat down on the throne. Patriarch Song He followed him and stood below the throne as if they were his guards. Only then did the 4 patriarchs and elders react. They hurriedly bowed to Ji Tianxing and saluted him. Greetings to Kendoma. The voices of the patriarchs and elders were clearly trembling. It was obvious that they were too excited to calm down. Previously, they had heard that Kenshin was an ancient pine grotto, but they hadn't been able to verify it. Their hearts were filled with anticipation and apprehension. Now that they saw Kenshin with their own eyes and felt Kenshin's divine pressure and powerful aura at close range, all their doubts were dispelled. Instead, they were filled with indescribable excitement and anticipation for the future. They knew very well that Kenshin's arrival meant that the reincarnation island was about to change. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly, indicating that they could dispense with the formalities. He didn't exchange fake pleasantries with the 4 patriarchs and went straight to the point. I believe you already know that I came to the reincarnation island a few days ago. The reason why the previous battle ended so quickly was also because of me. I didn't show up because I wanted to keep it a secret and not affect the following plan. The 4 patriarchs had previously suspected that Kenshin had participated in that battle. That was why the Song He tribe was safe and sound, annihilated the 8,000 soldiers and killed the 4 reincarnation divine generals. Since Kenshin had admitted it himself, there was no doubt about it. The patriarchs could roughly guess that Kenshin's plan was to ambush the soldiers under Commander Mingi's command. Ji Tianxing continued. According to my calculations, Commander Mingi has already sent out the 2nd batch of soldiers to besiege ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. It's almost time. Perhaps it's today, perhaps it's tomorrow, but I still have to lead the soldiers into battle. So let's not waste any more time and get straight to business. As he spoke, he threw out a jade slip. It landed in the middle of the hall and floated in midair. The jade slip's position was very clever. It was the same distance away from the 4 patriarchs. This is the pledge of surrender. Those who wish to join the rebel alliance and follow me to overthrow the rule of the god of the underworld and save the billions of people of the reincarnation island must recite this pledge on the spot. Of course, I won't force you. If anyone doesn't wish to follow me, you may leave later. Ji Tianxing's tone was calm, and his attitude was also very indifferent. This was the attitude he showed, but it brought a lot of pressure to the patriarchs. Just as they analyzed when they reflected, it was now they who needed Kenshin's help, not Kenshin who needed to rely on them. Since the 4 patriarchs had delayed with Commander Mingi for several months without surrendering, they had long been regarded as enemies by Commander Mingi. Their escape route had been cut off. They could only rely on Kenshin. So the pledge of surrender must be recited. But before reciting the pledge, the 4 patriarchs still wanted to struggle. May I ask, Lord Kenshin, did you bring any soldiers from the Boundless Heaven continent on this trip to the Reincarnation Island? The Hidden Dragon Patriarch, who had the most straightforward temperament, braced himself and asked first. His words were too clear, straightforward, and not tactful or respectful enough. When the other 3 patriarchs heard this, they all broke out in cold sweat for him and were secretly worried. Ji Tianxing glanced at the Hidden Dragon Patriarch and said indifferently, "This is confidential. Only those who join the Rebel Alliance and recite the Pledge of Surrender are qualified to know." The Hidden Dragon Patriarch choked on the spot and was speechless. Ji Tianxing's words were very reasonable and he couldn't refute. But he just wanted to know, did Kenshin come alone or did he come with an army? Then he would be willing to recite the Pledge of Surrender. Another old man in a purple brocade robe was the Patriarch of the Quicksand region. After bowing, he asked, "Lord Kenshin, we have all heard of your fame and know that you are omnipotent. Now that you have come, the small reincarnation island is naturally at your fingertips. But this old man has a presumptuous request, not for myself, but to give an explanation to nearly 10,000 patriarchs. So, this old man boldly asks you, can you give our patriarchs a promise? Even if it's just a verbal promise, there can be a guarantee. As soon as these words came out, the other patriarchs hurriedly nodded and echoed. To put it bluntly, they still didn't give up and wanted Ji Tianxing to promise them some benefits and treatment. Just like the ancient patriarchs of the boundless heaven continent, those who took the lead to seek refuge with Kenshin could be given a domain and develop forces in the surrounding 10 domains, etc. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 42-24. The 4 patriarchs had a beautiful plan, but they had overlooked one fact. The boundless heaven continent was 5 times larger than Reincarnation Island. After Kenshin took control of the boundless heaven continent, the clans of the Rebel Alliance could all be given territories. However, Reincarnation Island only had 18 domains. If they were given a domain and allowed to develop their forces in the surrounding 10 domains, the boundless heaven continent wouldn't be a problem. In a few hundred years, the 5 ancient clans would be the 5 giants of Reincarnation Island, the kind that could cover the sky with one hand. At that time, not only would they be the most powerful forces, but they would also be the ones in charge. If there were more friction and disputes between the 5 ancient clans, it would inevitably lead to war. How could Kenshin be willing to see such a situation? Facing the eager gazes of the 4 patriarchs, Ji Tianxing replied expressionlessly, the Rebel Alliance on Reincarnation Island has yet to be established, let alone defeat Commander Mingyi and the Blood Prison Marshal. We have yet to capture Reincarnation Island and save hundreds of millions of people. What can I promise you? I won't make empty promises and give you any land or benefits. The only promise I can give you is that after we succeed and I take control of Reincarnation Island, I will reward you according to your merits. Knowing Kenshin's attitude, the 4 patriarchs were somewhat disappointed and disheartened. However, they also knew that the reason Kenshin had given them the cold shoulder for 6 hours was to make them understand this point. Since they weren't qualified to negotiate with Kenshin, they could only accept. Thus, the purple-robed patriarch of the Quicksand clan took the lead in expressing his stance. He bowed to Ji Tianxing and said, Lord Kenshin's teachings are correct. What we should consider now is how to resist Commander Mingyi and his subordinates and save the hundreds of millions of people on Reincarnation Island as soon as possible. The Quicksand clan is willing to follow Lord Kenshin and contribute to saving Reincarnation Island. After saying these beautiful words, the Quicksand clan patriarch took the lead in picking up the jade slip and began to read its contents. The other 3 patriarchs were stunned for a moment, and then their eyes flashed with annoyance. They all regretted that their reactions were too slow. They didn't rush to declare their allegiance before Patriarch Quicksand did. In any case, everyone had to submit to the Kenshin. Taking the initiative to declare their allegiance to the Kenshin would earn them a favorable impression. Unfortunately, it was too late for them to react. Their only chance to perform had been snatched away by the Quicksand Patriarch. The Hidden Dragon Patriarch secretly despised him and thought to himself, this guy is really cunning. I have to be on guard against him in the future. Indeed, the 4 clans knew that the Pine Crane tribe had already latched onto Kenshin's leg, and that they had no chance. However, the patriarch of the Quicksand clan still took advantage of every opportunity and tried to gain a favorable impression of Kenshin. Perhaps in the future, Kenshin would take care of the Quicksand clan when it came time to reward them. Thinking of this, the other 3 patriarchs' minds became active. While they were secretly pondering and letting their imaginations run wild, the Quicksand Patriarch had already recited more than half of the Oath of Surrender. His face had already turned pale and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. His expression and eyes were somewhat unnatural. Obviously, he was frightened by the contents of the Oath of Surrender. All kinds of harsh and strict restrictions and regulations made him break out in cold sweat all over. He deeply realized that after reciting this Oath of Surrender, he would be completely trapped by Kenshin. From now on, he must be absolutely loyal to the Kenshin. He must not do anything that would harm the Kenshin's interests and safety. In other words, he must wholeheartedly work for the Kenshin. He must not be passive and slack off. Moreover, even if the Kenshin did not give him any benefits and did not give the Quicksand clan any conditions or treatment, he could not complain. How is this an oath of allegiance and loyalty? It's clearly a contract to sell myself. This thought flashed through the Quicksand Patriarch's mind. He wanted to cry but had no tears. However, he had already recited half of the Oath of Surrender. He could not give up halfway and had to finish reciting it. Just like this, his tone became lower and lower, and his spirit became more and more dispirited. He weakly finished reciting the Oath of Surrender. His whole body lit up with a dazzling divine light, and a wisp of Daoist rhyme appeared above his head. There were also bursts of muffled thunder in the sky. The Oath of Surrender was thus established. Under the supervision and restriction of the heavenly Tao, there was no possibility of changing or destroying it. The other three patriarchs were also dumbfounded. They stared at the quicksand patriarch, at the divine light all over his body and the Daoist rhyme above his head. They had heard before that those forces in the boundless heaven continent who surrendered to the Kenshin had to recite the Oath of Surrender and be supervised and restricted by the heavenly Tao. This matter sounded very mysterious, but they all thought that Kenshin was gilding themselves, deliberately mystifying them and packaging themselves as the spokesperson of the heavenly Tao. In addition, everyone only heard that the forces and powerhouses of the boundless heaven continent were forced to swear the oath of the heavenly Tao, but they had not heard of anyone being punished by the heavenly Tao. Over time, everyone did not take the Oath of Surrender too seriously. But now, the three patriarchs witnessed the changes in the quicksand patriarch with their own eyes and were dumbfounded on the spot. That dazzling divine light, rich Daoist rhyme, and the might of the heavenly Tao could not be faked. Only then did they understand that Kenshin could really use the power of the heavenly Tao, and the so-called Oath of the heavenly Tao was also true. As bystanders, the three patriarchs could all feel the mighty might of the heavenly Tao. Their hearts were filled with uneasiness, shock and fear. One could imagine how the quicksand patriarch, who was enveloped by the divine light and Daoist rhyme, felt at this moment under the heavenly Tao. He stood in place, stunned for a long time. It was not until the divine light and Daoist rhyme dissipated that he gradually came back to his senses. He did not raise his head to look at everyone's expressions. He silently bowed to Ji Tianxing and returned to his seat, remaining silent the entire time. It seemed that this old man still needed some time to recover. Next, it was the turn of the other three patriarchs. The three of them were all very nervous. They looked at each other, but no one went to take that jade slip. The main hall was very quiet, and the atmosphere was also somewhat awkward. However, the three of them could not be frozen here. No matter how terrifying the Oath of Surrender was, they had already expressed their intention to side with Kenshin. They could not go back on their words at the last minute. Even though Kenshin said that they would not be forced to side with them and swear allegiance. Those who were not willing to side with them could leave on their own later. However, they were not 3-year-old children. How could they dare to completely believe this sentence? If it were them, they would also not let the other party off so easily. After all, Kenshin's whereabouts were currently a huge secret. In order to be on the safe side and not leak this important information, they had to silence them. The three of them hesitated for 20 breaths. In the end, the hidden dragon patriarch was still young and impetuous. He took the lead and took the jade slip. He mustered up his courage, put on a posture of facing death calmly, and said the Oath of Surrender with a steady and powerful tone. Patriarch Song, he couldn't help but laugh upon seeing this. He thought to himself, I'm only asking you to say the Oath of Surrender, not to go into battle to kill the enemy. Is there a need to make such a big fuss? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 4225. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan quickly finished the pledge of surrender with a very solemn expression and an impassioned tone. When his whole body lit up with divine light, Taoist rhymes appeared above his head, and thunder sounded in the sky, his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This was not because he was frightened by the content of the pledge of surrender, but because he was frightened by the horrible heavenly might. Fortunately, the heavenly way's vision only lasted for 10 breaths of time before dissipating. The patriarch of the Hidden Dragon clan also bowed to Ji Tianxing and silently returned to his seat, calming down his complicated and chaotic mood. Next, it was the turn of the patriarch of the Fong clan from the Tianfong territory and the patriarch of the Kuei clan from the Kuei mountain territory. Everyone's eyes were focused on them. No matter how nervous they were, they could only bite the bullet and recite the pledge of surrender. A quarter of an hour later, the two patriarchs also finished reciting the pledge of surrender and experienced the baptism and awe of the heavenly way's power. Like the previous two patriarchs, they became very silent. Of course, the four patriarchs no longer dared to have unrealistic thoughts. and they were all in awe of Ji Tianxing. However, their spirits were dispirited and listless, and they felt like crying but had no tears to shed. They felt so desolate that they had nothing to live for. For some reason, Patriarch Song He, who did not think much at first, did not sympathize with the four patriarchs. Instead, he was gloating. Even when he saw that Kenshin did not speak as the most loyal minister of Kenshin on the Reincarnation Island, he took the initiative to say, "Congratulations to the four patriarchs for understanding your true intentions and joining the rebel alliance. In the future when we work together I hope you can help us. Of course we are all subordinates of Lord Kenshin and we should follow his orders. We must not overstep." The four patriarchs secretly scolded him for being a henchman, but they did not dare to show their dissatisfaction on the surface. They quickly nodded and said yes. Patriarch Song He read the contempt and disdain in the eyes of the four patriarchs, so he frowned and decided to add insult to injury. Before this, I think many people did not believe that the pledge of surrender made by Lord Kenshin was the so-called Heavenly Way's oath, and they did not believe that the power of the Heavenly Way would be used by Lord Kenshin. However, I would like to remind everyone that you must not have any wishful thinking. The legends are all true. Because today Tian Fa's matter has been confirmed. At this point, Chief Song He paused for a moment and turned around to look at Ji Tianxing. He seemed to be asking Ji Tianxing if he could reveal the information about the captives. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly in approval. Encouraged, Patriarch Song He continued, "In the previous battle, Lord Kenshin led us to kill the 4 reincarnation divine generals and more than 5,000 soldiers. However, more than 2,000 soldiers surrendered. Lord Kenshin was merciful and did not kill those captives. Instead, he locked them up in our prison. Today, Lord Kenshin swore an oath to the Heavenly Tao to subdue those captives. They could be of use in the future." Unexpectedly, a few fearless captives actually took the opportunity to inform Commander Nether River after we left. However, as soon as they took out their communication jade slips and did not have time to input the message, they were struck by lightning out of nowhere and turned into ashes. Not even dregs were left. This is the consequence of violating the Heavenly Way's oath, and also the consequence of looking down on the power of the Heavenly Way. Chief Song He said with certainty. This matter was witnessed by more than 2,000 people. It was impossible to make up a story carelessly. The 4 patriarchs knew that it was true after hearing this. They immediately felt a chill down their spines and their hearts were filled with fear. Originally, they were still a little conflicted about the Heavenly Way's oath and silently muttered in their hearts about Kenshin's actions. However, after hearing this matter, they were so frightened that they broke out in cold sweat. They did not even dare to complain about Kenshin or disrespect Kenshin anymore. The facts proved that the Heavenly Way was always monitoring these people who had made the oath. However, there was no standard or indication for how the Heavenly Way judged that they had violated the oath and when the heavenly punishment would descend. Therefore, in order to protect their worthless lives and not die an unjust death, they could only behave themselves. They did not dare to test the authenticity of the Heavenly Way's oath at all. In fact, in order to win Kenshin's trust and wash away the suspicion of having resentment against Kenshin, the 4 patriarchs even scrambled to express their stance. "Lord Kenshin, please judge clearly. Heaven and earth can bear witness to our reverence and worship for you. Lord Kenshin, since we have made the oath, we will definitely follow your lead and will not dare to have the slightest disloyalty. As long as Lord Kenshin gives the order, even if we have to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire, we will not hesitate." Words like this to express their loyalty kept coming out of the 4 patriarchs' mouths. Chief Song He looked at everyone with a smile and did not say anything else. The matter had been accomplished. He had played a small role in it and could be considered to have consolidated his position. When everyone quieted down, Ji Tianxing said, "Since the 4 patriarchs' loyalty is clear, then I can rest assured. Although your descendants have not arrived yet, you came at the right time. Soon the second batch of troops sent by Commander Mingyi should arrive. When that time comes, you will also have to participate in the battle and kill the enemy. Let me see your loyalty, strength and means." Hearing that, the 4 patriarchs' expressions changed slightly, and a trace of annoyance flashed in their eyes. If they had known that Commander Mingyi would send out the second batch of troops and would arrive in a few days, they would not have boasted and expressed their loyalty. Otherwise, they could have just watched from the sidelines and watched how Kenshin led the Song He clan to defeat the second batch of troops. How safe would it have been to hide and watch the show? They just had to get themselves involved and be sent to the battlefield by Kenshin to kill the enemy. Kenshin's tricks are too deep and impossible to guard against. There was also Song Hetao, this old man who acted like a fawning lackey and sang the same tune as Kenshin, trapping them so miserably. Alright, the 4 patriarchs can withdraw and rest first and wait for my orders. After settling the matter, Ji Tianxing waved his big sleeves and dismissed the 4 patriarchs. Patriarch Song He arranged a temporary place for them to rest. Patriarch Song He had arranged for Ji Tianxing to live in a quiet, secluded and undisturbed house. What he had arranged for the 4 patriarchs was to randomly find an empty house for them to stay in for the time being. Although the location of the house was very bad, there were houses, palaces and clock towers all around. Fortunately, the house was still considered clean and there were also a few maids and guards. While the 4 patriarchs secretly cursed Patriarch Song He for being stingy, they could only stay in the house to rest. After making arrangements for the 4 patriarchs, Patriarch Song He hurried back to the meeting hall to see Ji Tianxing. He knew that Kenshin must have something to tell him. As expected, Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment, then said, I have a faint premonition that the second batch of troops sent by Commander Mingi is already approaching ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. They should not be so rash as to attack directly. They will most likely send a group of scouts first to scout the situation in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. After that, they will launch an attack. Pass down the order. Chapter 42-26. Ji Tianxing gave a series of orders to Patriarch Pine Crane. The main content of the orders was to strengthen the defenses of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and not give the enemy scouts a chance to infiltrate. In order to make the act more realistic, all the guards guarding the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven withdrew into the Grotto Heaven. The formation at the entrance of the Grotto Heaven was also closed, as if they were going to defend ancient Pine Grotto Heaven to the death. This was the only way to make the army dispatched by Commander Styx believe that the Pine Crane clan had no confidence in facing Commander Styx head-on even with the secret help of the 4 clans. The second point was that the 3,000-plus disciples of the Pine Crane clan had to participate in this battle. Moreover, the 2,000-plus captives imprisoned in the prison had to be scattered and mixed into the Pine Crane clansmen's groups. Only this kind of mixed army, divided into several groups, would not cause chaos. The third point was that Ji Tianxing would personally set up another formation near the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. With the Pine Crane clan's God King and the 4 clan patriarchs, it would only take a few hours to complete. The most important point was that Ji Tianxing would still conceal himself in this battle. Unless absolutely necessary, he would not reveal his true identity. Regardless of whether Commander Styx's side was suspicious or not, he had to delay as much as possible. The longer Commander Styx saw through it, the easier it would be for his side to win, and the smaller the price they would have to pay. After listening to Ji Tianxing's orders, Patriarch Pine Crane understood his plan and thought process. This time, the second army dispatched to deal with Commander Styx would fight in ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. He was deeply puzzled and could not help but ask, Lord Kenshin, didn't we set up a formation outside the Grotto Heaven? Why not set up an ambush inside the formation to deal with the second army? Why do you have to work so hard and waste so much effort to set up a formation inside the Grotto Heaven? In the previous battle, Patriarch Pine Crane had tasted the sweetness of victory and also witnessed Kenshin's terrifying strength. With the experience of success, he naturally wanted to follow the prescribed order and replicate the success and victory of the last time. However, Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, last time the 8,000-strong army was not on guard. Of course it was easy to deal with them. But this time the second batch of soldiers was very vigilant and alert. They would not be easily ambushed. Furthermore, the number of enemy troops this time would definitely exceed 10,000, perhaps even double the previous number. This was a crucial battle for Commander Mingi to save face and intimidate the Reincarnation Island. They could only win and not lose. Therefore, I will put them into the ancient Pine Grotto and then try to kill them. By doing so, we can also prevent the fish from escaping the net from leaking the news and my whereabouts. After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Patriarch Song He finally understood the reason, and he couldn't help but nod in admiration. Lord Kenshin is indeed far-sighted. His considerations are so comprehensive that not even a drop of water can leak out. It was this old man who was slow-witted. Please don't blame me. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, go and carry out your mission. Patriarch Song He didn't waste any more time. He quickly bowed and left to pass on the order. After a short half an hour, the guards guarding the entrance of the grotto had all retreated back to ancient Pine Grotto, and the defensive array of the grotto's entrance was also closed. At the same time, more than 3,600 Pine Crane clan members had all gathered in the square. More than 2,000 captives locked up in the prison had also arrived near the square. Under the command of Patriarch Song He and several elders, more than 2,500 captives began to integrate into the ranks of the Pine Crane clan members. Everyone carried out the order with high efficiency. In less than half an hour, they had completed the integration of 6,200 soldiers. They were temporarily divided into 3 teams and were on standby in the square. Next, Patriarch Song He and several elders led these soldiers to the vicinity of the grotto's exit. The area within 20,000 miles of the exit was a flat grassland covered with green grass and wild flowers. Ji Tianxing had already led the 4 patriarchs of the Hidden Dragon Clan, Fong Clan, and the others to set up a divine array here. Ji Tianxing stood high in the sky and cast a spell. His entire body was shrouded in blazing white divine light, and no one could see his face and figure clearly. The 4 patriarchs and 4 elders stood in different positions, casting spells according to Ji Tianxing's instructions. After Patriarch Song He arrived with the army, he quickly joined the team that was setting up the grand array. Under the command of him and several elders, the 6,200 soldiers spread out, occupying the various nodes and positions of the array, and began to cast spells together. With the addition of the 6,200 soldiers, Ji Tianxing's speed in setting up the divine array was obviously several times faster. This time, the divine array he was going to set up was more marvelous and grander than the one he had set up outside the grotto. After all, there were more enemies to deal with this time and they would be more powerful. Ji Tianxing was still setting up a high-grade king-level divine array, but with 3 grand arrays stacked together, its power was closer to that of a high-grade king-level divine array. Even if a peak divine king was trapped inside, it would be difficult for him to escape in a short period of time. In other words, even if Commander Mingyi and the Blood Prison Marshal were to come personally, as long as they were trapped in the grand array, they would be buried here. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, 8 hours had passed. This even more exquisite and magnificent formation, which covered an area of 20,000 miles in radius, was finally completed successfully. Everyone stopped casting spells and followed Ji Tianxing's orders, meditating where they were to recover their divine power as soon as possible. Next, all they had to do was wait. Patiently wait for the arrival of the second army. At the same time, the 500 assassins of the Hidden Death Group quietly arrived near ancient Pine Grotto. They were well trained and cooperated very well. They quickly spread out and investigated the situation within 100,000 miles of the grotto. As long as there were any clues, these assassins would not let go of them. The tense and oppressive 4 hours passed. After repeated searches, the 500 assassins finally checked the area within 100,000 miles, and confirmed that the area around the entrance of ancient Pine Grotto was safe. Moreover, the 2 mid-divine king assassin commanders also felt that something was amiss. They felt that there was something wrong 20,000 miles away from the entrance of the grotto, and there was an unnatural power. However, they were not strong enough to find out the reason, and could only report it to the Blood Prison Marshal. After another 6 hours, the Blood Prison Marshal finally arrived with his army. The 9 divine warships stopped in the sky and remained invisible. The Blood Prison Marshal led more than 20 divine kings to personally investigate that strange place. After everyone brainstormed and investigated repeatedly, 2 hours later the Blood Prison Marshal finally came to a conclusion. 20,000 miles away from the entrance of the grotto, there was a high king-grade grand array with a radius of 10,000 miles. The towering mountains and forests they saw were all illusions created by the grand array. In reality, the area within 10,000 miles had experienced a great battle and had long been scorched and ruined. This result made the Blood Prison Marshal and the others excited. They immediately concluded that this grand array was set up by the 5 ancient clans. The 4 divine generals of Samsara and the 8,000 soldiers were ambushed here. Chapter 42-27. Discovering an array with a radius of 10,000 miles and being able to see the ruins within the array was a great harvest. The army led by the Blood Prison Marshal had not even entered the ancient Pine Grotto heaven, but they were already able to obtain such a harvest. This caused everyone's morale to soar and their spirits to rise. Only unknown traps and schemes would cause people to worry and fear. Since he had found out about the Pine Crane clan's scheme and understood how the 5 clans had killed the 8,000 soldiers, the Blood Prison Marshal began to think of a countermeasure. After pondering for a moment, the smile on the Blood Prison Marshal's face disappeared. He vaguely felt that something was wrong and could not help but frown. Since the 5 clans used this array to successfully kill the 4 reincarnation divine generals and the 8,000 soldiers, why didn't they use the same trick again? This great array is still intact, but they gave up? The surrounding God King generals also realized this problem and hurriedly discussed it. Maybe the 5 clans felt that they had just won a battle and that we would not dare to invade? That's impossible. Even an idiot would know that we will definitely take revenge. It's impossible for the 5 clans to not be prepared. I'm guessing that they might feel that this formation isn't strong enough to fight against us. But this is still a bit far-fetched. Even if they could not use this array to resist us, they could still use it as the first line of defense and contend with us for a few rounds. That's right. If the 5 clans used this array to set up an ambush, we would not be defeated, but we would have to pay a great price. While the generals were discussing, the deputy commander of the Assassin Corps said to everyone, "We have already investigated clearly. There is no one within 150,000 miles around the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, not even a scout. The entrance to the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven has already been closed, and there are no guards left behind. In other words, the Pine Crane clan is holed up in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and should be stubbornly resisting until the end. However, we still do not know if the other 4 clans are also in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven." Hearing this, the generals and the God Kings all frowned, revealing anxious and worried expressions. Everyone knew that if the 2 sides fought outside, they would have an overwhelming advantage and would be able to defeat the 5 clans very quickly. However, the 5 clans were hiding in the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. With the protection of the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven's eggshell, it was indeed a bit troublesome. Everyone put their heads together and racked their brains on how to break out of this situation. At this moment, the Blood Prison Marshal said with a solemn expression, "You've overlooked a detail. When was this 10,000-mile-wide formation built under our feet built? Given the strength and number of experts of the 5 ancient clans, they would need at least 2 days to complete this array. However, before that battle, 2 messengers had entered the ancient Pine Grotto first. A few hours later, the 4 divine generals of Samsara and 8,000 soldiers arrived. Why didn't the 2 messengers notice anything unusual?" This question stunned all the generals and God Kings. Everyone understood Marshal Blood Prison's meaning. Someone immediately asked, "Grand Marshal, you mean to say that this great array was completed after the 2 messengers entered ancient Pine Paradise and before the army of 8,000 arrived? In that case, the 5 clans were able to set up this great formation in just a few hours?" Someone immediately retorted, "That's impossible. How can the God Kings of the 5 great clans have this ability?" Someone else raised his doubts and explained, "I also feel that it's impossible for the 5 great clans to set up this great formation in just a few hours. The most likely possibility is that they set up this great formation a few days in advance. The 2 messengers weren't very strong and they were careless when they passed by. That's why they didn't notice anything unusual." This inference was reasonable and won the approval of many God Kings and generals. However, Marshal Blood Prison added, "Don't forget that before the 2 messengers arrived at ancient Pine Paradise, the Pine Crane clan had no idea that the Grand Marshal was enraged and sent 4 divine generals of Samsara and 8,000 soldiers. It's impossible for the 5 great clans to predict the future and know that the 8,000 soldiers are about to move." For a moment, many God Kings and generals were at a loss for words. A God King guessed a possibility and his expression turned grave. He asked, "Grand Marshal, do you mean that there's a trap here? That it's not just the other 4 clans that are helping the Pine Crane clan, but also other factions and experts?" Everyone knew that in the current Reincarnation Island, there was almost no faction that had the qualifications and courage to help the Pine Crane clan and confront Commander Styx. The so-called other powers and experts was just a euphemism. Everyone was well aware that this was referring to that world-renowned expert whose might shook the entire god realm. Everyone had discussed and suspected this in private, but they didn't dare to mention Kenshin's name in front of Commander Styx and Marshal Blood Prison. Martial Blood Prison nodded and said without hesitation, "As of now, there's no news about Kenshin in the Boundless Heaven continent. Our scouts have searched the entire Reincarnation Island with all their might, but they haven't found any traces or whereabouts of Kenshin. However, we can't let down our guard. We can't rule out the possibility that Kenshin has already arrived at Ancient Pine Paradise." The expressions of many god kings and generals changed. Fear and worry flashed through their eyes. Many people couldn't help but think that if Kenshin was really in Ancient Pine Paradise, then all of them would be doomed. Seeing that everyone was silent and their morale was low, Martial Blood Prison said in a dignified tone, "I'm only suspecting this possibility, so I want everyone to be more careful. Next, we'll block the entrance to Ancient Pine Paradise. There's no rush to make a move. We'll rest for 2 days. Assassin Group, continue to investigate the situation and collect information from all sides." Understood. Everyone said in unison and was about to return to their respective teams and prepare to head to the entrance of Ancient Pine Paradise. However, Martial Blood Prison ordered again, "There's no rush to move. Everyone help me first and destroy this great formation. If we don't destroy this great formation, it'll always be a hidden danger." Thus, more than 10,000 soldiers stayed in the divine warship and waited for orders. More than 20 god kings joined forces and worked together with Martial Blood Prison to destroy the great formation that was 10,000 miles in radius. In the process of destroying the great formation, everyone had a deeper understanding of how exquisite and powerful this great formation was. This made Martial Blood Prison and the many god kings feel that this matter was even more fishy. They also became more suspicious. Apart from the 4 ancient clans, it was possible that Kenshin had already arrived at Ancient Pine Paradise. Everyone became more and more worried and their morale was even lower. Even though everyone worked together and spent half a day to finally destroy the Great Formation, they didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. They were all praying that Martial Blood Prison's guess would not be correct. Otherwise, if they really faced the mysterious and powerful Kenshin, their side would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. Chapter 42-28. After destroying the array, the Blood Prison Marshal took the fleet and rushed to Ancient Pine Paradise in a grandiose manner. When they arrived near the entrance, the fleet stopped in the sea of clouds and became invisible, waiting silently. The Blood Prison Marshal led the God Kings out of the ship and personally observed the Grotto Heaven's entrance. Just as the Hidden Death Group had reported, the Grotto Heaven's entrance was empty. There was not even a shadow. The formation at the entrance had already been closed and was hidden in the sea of clouds. Under such circumstances, it would be difficult for the Blood Prison Marshal to kill his way into Ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, regardless of which factions and experts were inside. Even without the help of the Kenshin and the 4 ancient clans, the Pine Crane clan's 8,000 people and the protection of Ancient Pine Grotto Heaven would be able to stall for 3 to 5 days. Fortunately, the Blood Prison Marshal was an excellent and cautious commander. He would not underestimate the enemy, nor would he be eager for quick success. Without knowing the situation in Ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, he was not in a hurry to attack. First, he had 18,000 soldiers guard the Grotto Heaven's entrance and rest in the ship. 500 assassins from the Hidden Death Group were also monitoring the movements within 100,000 miles, receiving information from the intelligence organization at any time. The Blood Prison Marshal and more than 20 God King experts stood in the sea of clouds and observed for a long time. He pointed at the empty sea of clouds and asked everyone, "If you want to attack Ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, you must first destroy the formation. Bunshui will do it himself, and with the help of all of you, how long will it take to destroy it?" The place he was pointing at was the peak of the giant mountain. There was originally a plaza and altar as well as a spatial door. Although the formation was invisible, the God Kings could still see the general outline with their abilities and secret techniques. Hearing the Blood Prison Marshal's question, the God Kings and generals discussed for a while before someone answered, "Marshal, if we use all our strength to destroy the formation, we can destroy it in 2 days at the fastest and 4 days at the longest. And this is taking into account that the Pine Crane clan is in the Grotto Heaven and using all their strength to support the formation." The Blood Prison Marshal nodded slightly and asked, "What if the other 4 clans are also in the Grotto Heaven and have 5,000 troops to help the Pine Crane clan?" The general hesitated for a moment before replying in an uncertain tone, "It will take at least 3 days. If it is slow, perhaps 5 or 6 days." The Blood Hell Marshal pondered for a moment and gave the order to his subordinates. Pass down Benchuai's order. Gather at least 4,000 men from the surrounding 4 regions and send reinforcements as soon as possible. This. The generals were all dumbfounded. The God Kings all looked at each other. Everyone knew that the Blood Prison Marshal was very cautious and had rarely been defeated in battle. But wasn't this too cautious? They already had 18,000 soldiers on their side. Even if the 5 ancient clans emptied their pockets, they wouldn't be able to gather so many soldiers. It was clearly a matter that was in the bag, so why did the Grand Marshal still need to transfer 4,000 soldiers as reinforcements? Wouldn't this show that they were too weak and lacked confidence? Furthermore, the true elites were all gathered in Yudu. The soldiers left behind to guard the various regions were all weaker. Even if they gathered 4,000 soldiers at the last moment, they might not be able to unleash much combat power. Even though the generals and God Kings were grumbling in their hearts, they didn't dare to disobey the Blood Prison Marshal's order. Some even had selfish thoughts in their minds, so they didn't raise any objections. They even agreed with the Blood Prison Marshal's decision. After all, it was better to have 4,000 soldiers who were slightly weaker and didn't have any background as cannon fodder. This way they could also reduce the casualties of their subordinates. Inside the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing and the 3,000-plus disciples of the Pine Crane clan were still waiting patiently in the formation. The patriarchs and elders of the 4 clans were also meditating in the array, their hearts gradually calming down. In the beginning, they were still worried about whether their lives would be in danger when the battle really started. But for some unknown reason, after staying under the sword god's skin for a few hours, they inexplicably felt at ease, steady, and even more confident and emboldened. A few hours ago, when the Blood Prison Marshal led many God Kings to destroy the formation outside the Grotto Heaven, Ji Tianxing had already sensed it. The formation that he had set up would naturally be sensed. Furthermore, he used some small tricks left behind in the formation to detect the number and strength of the people who were breaking the formation. More than 1,100 years ago, the Blood Prison Marshal participated in the siege of the Kenshin. Therefore, Ji Tianxing had an impression of the Blood Prison Marshal's divine power aura. When the Blood Prison Marshal took the lead to destroy the formation, he sensed it almost immediately. I originally thought that Commander Mingyi and the Blood Prison Marshal would defend Yudu to the death. This time they would send capable generals to lead the army to take revenge. I didn't expect the Blood Prison Marshal to personally lead the army over. From this, it can be seen how much Commander Mingyi cares about his face and how eager he is to take revenge. However, this is also an unexpected surprise for us. Since the Blood Prison Marshal has come, then don't think about leaving alive. Of the 2 rulers of the Reincarnation Island, let's kill one first. The arrival of the Blood Prison Marshal was excellent news for Ji Tianxing. However, he was not in a hurry to tell this news to his soldiers and the 5 patriarchs, because he knew that the Blood Prison Marshal was not a reckless person and had always been cautious in his actions. He speculated that the Blood Prison Marshal would not attack immediately after arriving at the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. He would definitely set up camp first and investigate the situation before making a move. It would take at least 1 or 2 days before the Blood Prison Marshal would lead the army to attack. At that time, it would take another 2 or 3 days to break through the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. In the end, he still had to wait 3 or 4 days before he could kill the Blood Prison Marshal. Since that was the case, Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry and simply meditated and cultivated in the formation. The development of the matter was just as Ji Tianxing expected. In the next 2 days, the Blood Prison Marshal and his army did not move. On the evening of the 3rd day, 4 troops rushed to the entrance of the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven from all directions at an extremely fast speed. These 4 troops were the soldiers that had been temporarily gathered from the surrounding 4 regions. Each troop had about 1,000 people. The leaders were several godly kings and the rest were godly lords. Of course, the ratio of upper godly lords was very low. Most of them were middle and lower godly lords. To the godly kings and generals, only upper godly lords could be called elite soldiers and were the main force against the 5 great clans. Towards the arrival of these 4,000 soldiers, the generals and godly kings reacted indifferently. Only the Blood Prison Marshal had an amiable attitude and expressed his welcome and praise to these soldiers. The 4,000 soldiers lived in a remote corner and had low status. When had they ever seen such a scene? Hearing the praise and encouragement of the Blood Prison Marshal, they were moved and their blood boiled. Thus, the Blood Prison Marshal ordered the attack and let the 4,000 soldiers take the lead in attacking the Grotto Heaven's entrance. They did not hesitate to agree. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 42-29. The 4,000 soldiers were stationed in their respective domains, and the strongest and most powerful people they could see in their lives were the domain lords of their respective domains. They were not qualified to see overlords like the Blood Prison Marshal and Commander Styx. Now, not only did the 4,000 soldiers see the Blood Prison Marshal in person, but they also received praise and encouragement. Naturally, their blood boiled and they were inexplicably excited. When the Blood Prison Marshal gave the order to attack, they had the mentality of soldiers dying for their bosom friends. They attacked the array at the Grotto Heaven's entrance without any regard for their own safety. Thousands of dazzling pillars of light and the shadows of swords and sabers bombarded the empty clouds. Rumble. With an earth-shattering explosion, the clouds within a few hundred miles dissipated, and a huge five-colored wall of light appeared. Inside the wall of light was a huge mountain peak. There was a plaza and an altar at the peak, but no one was guarding it. There was no need for the Blood Prison Marshal to boost their morale. The 4,000 soldiers had to do their best and attack with all their might. Bang, bang, bang. Rumble. Divine technique shadows that blotted out the sky constantly bombarded the five-colored wall of light, causing a series of earth-shattering explosions. The five-colored wall of light trembled and flashed with divine light, but no cracks appeared. The 4,000 soldiers attacked for 15 minutes without stopping, as if they did not know the concept of fatigue. Not far away, nearly 30 god kings and generals watched this scene expressionlessly. In their view, it was natural for the 4,000 soldiers to be the vanguard and cannon fodder. There was no response from the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven at present, but soon the Pine Crane clan would launch a counterattack. At that time the 4,000 soldiers would pay with their lives. As expected, inside the ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, the deacons of the Pine Crane clan were monitoring the situation outside through the array at the Grotto Heaven's entrance. When they found that an army was attacking the array at the Grotto Heaven's entrance, they immediately cast spells to support the array and reported the situation to Patriarch Pine Crane. When Patriarch Pine Crane received the news, he immediately became spirited and reminded all his disciples to stay alert. Commander Styx's lackeys have finally launched their attack. Everyone prepare for battle. Patriarch Pine Crane's shout rang out in the array, and it immediately received a response from the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples. Everyone stopped meditating and took out their divine weapons to prepare for battle. Even though the Pine Crane clansmen wanted to open the Grotto Heaven's entrance and let the Blood Hell Marshal and the army into the Grotto Heaven. At that time, once the army entered the ambush circle, the Pine Crane race could surround and attack with all their might and end the battle as soon as possible. However, directly opening the entrance to the heavenly abode was too fake. It would definitely arouse the other party's suspicion. If the Pine Crane tribe did not defend and allowed the other party to break through the Grotto Heaven's entrance, it would seem intentional. If the commander of the army was cautious enough, he would still have doubts. Therefore, in order to successfully carry out the plan and annihilate the invading enemies, the Pine Crane tribe could only cooperate with the enemy to put on a show. Patriarch Song he ordered several elders to lead 10 deacons and 1,000 disciples to the entrance to support the formation and resist the enemy's fierce attacks. 1,000 Pine Crane disciples channeled their divine power into the formation to strengthen it. Several elders and 10 deacons also controlled the formation to launch a counterattack. Swish, swish. Soon, thousands of divine light blades, wind, fire, and lightning burst out of the five-colored wall that looked like a sky canopy. It poured down on the 4,000 soldiers like a flood. Even though the 4,000 soldiers reacted quickly enough and dodged in time, they were not spared. Bam, 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 kaboom. With a series of dull explosions, more than 1,000 soldiers who were unable to retreat in time were drowned by the divine light, wind, fire, and lightning. The power of a king-level high-grade divine formation was indeed not to be underestimated. At least 800 middle-grade and low-grade divine lords were beaten until they were covered in wounds and blood. They let out shrill screams. More than 400 people were directly killed by the divine light and turned into ashes. Not even their corpses were left. The 2,000 soldiers who were lucky enough to escape shuddered when they saw this scene. Their high morale also decreased greatly. they immediately became much more clear-headed. Some of the smarter ones already understood why the Blood Hell Marshal was so amiable to them and even let them lead the charge. He wanted them to be cannon fodder. But it was useless for these people to understand. They could not disobey the Blood Hell Marshal's orders, nor could they flee at the last minute. Now even if they knew that they would die in battle, they could only brace themselves and charge forward. Soldiers, do not be discouraged, do not be afraid, and do not retreat. The Blood Hell Marshal looked at the somewhat panicked soldiers and shouted in a dignified tone, "In order to protect our home and exterminate the rebels, what is this little sacrifice? We soldiers should be bathed in blood and fight to the death on the battlefield. Everyone, do not worry and attack. Ben Shui will remember each and every one of you. If you die in battle, Ben Shui will give you posthumous honors and treat your families well." As the commander of the army, the Blood Hell Marshal had led troops to tens of thousands of battles. He naturally knew what his soldiers were thinking. His words had a great motivational effect on the soldiers. The low morale of the 3,000 soldiers immediately recovered and returned to their peak condition. Everyone had the determination and attitude to die for justice as they shouted and attacked again. "Go, brothers, let's go." Soon, the divine spell shadows that blotted out the sky and covered the earth once again bombarded the five-colored light wall like a flood. Loud rumbling sounds rang out again. The five-colored light wall began to tremble again, flashing with divine light. Inside the grotto heaven, the disciples of the Pine Crane clan also felt the pressure and continued to cast spells to support the formation. The elders and deacons calmly cast spells and controlled the formation to launch a counterattack, continuously exhausting the enemy's forces. As time passed, the casualties of the 3,000 soldiers attacking the grotto heaven's entrance continued to increase. The Blood Hell Marshal remained calm as he watched the soldiers being killed one after another or withdraw from the battle with heavy injuries and retreat to a distant place to heal their wounds. However, the generals beside him could not help but suggest when they saw the 4,000 soldiers slowly dwindle to 2,000. "Marshal, we can't let those soldiers keep attacking while our army stands by and does nothing. If this continues, the remaining 2,000 soldiers will be conflicted. Moreover, their combat strength is slightly low. Wasting them like this won't do much good. Marshal, it seems that the Pine Crane clan's counterattack is not strong enough. Our soldiers can take action now." These generals still had a bit of conscience and spoke a few words of fairness. The Blood Hell Marshal finally nodded in agreement and waved his hand to issue the order. Thus the four generals bowed and accepted the order. They led the 8,000 soldiers to join the ranks attacking the grotto heaven's entrance. The four divine warships of the 8,000 soldiers also fired at full power and bombarded the five-colored light wall. Chapter 42:30. As soon as the Blood Hell Marshal sent out 8,000 troops to participate in the battle, the Pine Crane clan members in the grotto heaven felt the pressure increase exponentially. The five-colored light wall at the entrance of the grotto heaven also trembled violently and emitted crisp cracking sounds. Cracks were about to appear. It was very difficult for the 1,000 disciples to hold on. Even if they resisted with all their might, the army would probably enter the grotto heaven within a few hours. Therefore, Patriarch Pine Crane gave the order to send another 1,000 disciples and 10 deacons to resist the army's attack. With the addition of 1,000 Pine Crane clan members, the pressure on everyone was greatly reduced and they felt much more relaxed. Both sides entered a stalemate again. A few elders and 10 deacons continued to control the defensive formation to slaughter the army outside. Ji Tianxing, Patriarch Pine Crane, and the other 4 patriarchs were watching from the sidelines and waiting quietly. Everyone knew that the battle had just begun. The Blood Hell Marshal's side hadn't used all their strength and was still cautiously probing. If the Pine Crane clan used all their strength now, it would definitely arouse the suspicion of the other party. Once the Blood Hell Marshal became suspicious, it was very likely that he would pause the attack and delay for a few more days. The longer this battle dragged on, the greater the impact on Ji Tianxing's plan. At the very least, it would be very difficult for the army of 18,000 to all step into the trap. It would be an extravagant hope to catch all of them in one fell swoop and not leak any information. This battle wasn't something that could end just by fighting with all their might. The tactical response was actually Ji Tianxing trying to figure out the Blood Hell Marshal's mentality. As long as he could grasp the Blood Hell Marshal's mentality and guess the Blood Hell Marshal's thoughts and countermeasures, he would be able to defeat the other party. Unknowingly, a day had passed. The 8,000 soldiers under the Blood Hell Marshal and the 4,000 soldiers who were treated as cannon fodder had been attacking for a day. It could be said that they were exhausted and suffered heavy casualties. The 4,000 soldiers had naturally become cannon fodder. 80% of them had been sacrificed, and the remaining 20% had been seriously injured and had retreated to a distance to recuperate. At least for a few months, they would have no combat strength and would not be able to participate in the battle. Therefore, the Blood Hell Marshal gave them the order to treat their injuries within 2 days and return to their respective areas. After the battle was over, the Blood Prison Marshal would reward them according to their merits. The 800 soldiers who were lucky enough to survive believed that the Blood Prison Marshal wouldn't lie to them and felt slightly comforted. However, no one knew if the Blood Prison Marshal would still have the opportunity to reward these soldiers after the war. In addition, of the 8,000 soldiers who joined the battle in the second batch, more than 1,000 were killed and more than 2,000 were injured. The more heavily injured soldiers had all left the battlefield to recuperate. The Blood Prison Marshal could only send 2 more divine generals to lead 4,000 soldiers into battle. As a result, the number of people participating in the battle remained at around 9,000. There were still 6,000 soldiers who had yet to join the battle. They were resting and waiting for orders within the divine warships. Since the Blood Hell Marshal had already invested so many troops, he believed that the Pine Crane clan could no longer resist. The facts were indeed so. The first 2 batches of disciples dispatched by the Pine Crane clan were indeed weak, and it was difficult for them to continue. Left with no choice, Patriarch Song he could only send another 1,000 men as reinforcements. A total of 3,000 people worked together to cast spells to increase the strength of the defensive formation. Only then could they barely resist the enemy's strong attack and not collapse immediately. If it weren't for the 2,000 captives that Ji Tianxing had taken in, the Pine Crane clan would only have a few hundred disciples left after sending out 3,000 people to participate in the battle. They were practically at the end of their rope. At this moment, the 2,000 captives and 3,000 Pine Crane disciples made a total of 6,000 people. Even if 3,000 people joined the battle, there would still be 3,000 people left in the trap formation to wait for orders. Patriarch Song he believed that this was something that the enemy wouldn't expect. Late at night, the offensive and defensive battle between the two sides was still playing out. Patriarch Song he headed to the center of the formation to ask Ji Tianxing if they were still going according to the plan and if there were any changes that needed to be made. Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation and replied with a calm expression, "We are still going according to the plan. Currently the enemy has already lost more than 6,000 soldiers, but there are still nearly 10,000 people participating in the battle. They have already used 70 to 80% of their strength, so they will guess that we have also used the same amount of troops. Their wariness will also be greatly reduced. From tomorrow onwards, let the disciples hold back a little and don't use their full strength. In this way, the formation at the entrance of the grotto heaven will constantly be broken and repaired again. When the time comes, the speed of repairing the formation will slow down and the formation will become riddled with holes until it is completely broken. This process will take one more day. When they finally break through the entrance of the grotto heaven in the early morning of the third day, their wariness will be reduced by 70 to 80% and they will rush in. At that time the real decisive battle will begin and their nightmare will begin." Patriarch Song he didn't doubt Ji Tianxing's analysis at all. He nodded expectantly and said, "This subordinate understands." As expected, from the morning of the second day onwards, the Pine Crane clan's strength had clearly weakened and they lacked the strength to continue fighting. The power of the defensive formation had clearly weakened, and the multicolored light wall had also become dim. The divine power was no longer abundant. Of the more than 9,000 soldiers attacking the entrance of the grotto heaven with all their strength, several hundred were injured or killed. Only 9,000 people were still fighting. However, they saw the hope of breaking through the ancient Pine Grotto heaven. They were all in high spirits and launched an all-out attack. Cracks constantly appeared on the multicolored light wall, which was then repaired by the Pine Crane clan. However, it didn't take long for more cracks to appear. As time passed, more and more cracks appeared, and the speed of the Pine Crane clan's repair became slower and slower. The soldiers under the command of the Blood Hell Marshal couldn't see the situation in the grotto heaven, nor could they see the expressions of the Pine Crane disciples. However, they guessed that the Pine Crane disciples must be very angry, sullen, and flustered. However, the truth was exactly the opposite. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who had participated in the battle had long been replaced. They were circulating their martial arts to regulate their breathing and restore their divine power. The 3,000 disciples and captives who had been resting in the trap formation entered the battle and controlled the defensive formation unhurriedly. The situation was developing step by step according to Ji Tianxing's speculation. A day passed. By the time it was late at night, the formation at the entrance of the ancient pine grotto heaven was already full of scars and holes. The multicolored light wall was full of gaps and cracks. The speed of repair was far from keeping up with the speed of destruction. Everyone knew that the grotto heaven's entrance was about to be broken, and the true decisive battle was about to arrive. Many generals and god kings arrived before the blood prison marshal. They were excited as they rubbed their fists and asked to fight. "Marshal, the grotto heaven's entrance is about to be breached. We will be able to enter the ancient pine grotto heaven in 4 hours at the latest. Marshal, please allow this general to take the lead." The soldiers who participated in breaking the formation have worked hard and contributed greatly. They have used up too much energy. Let them bring up the rear and take the opportunity to rest. This general has led 2,000 elite soldiers to rest in the divine worship. Please allow us to be the vanguard. Chapter 42:31. In the past 2 days, when the army was attacking the grotto heaven's entrance, these 6,000 soldiers were resting in the divine worships and had no intention of asking for battle. But now, the defensive formation at the grotto heaven's entrance was about to be breached, and these 6,000 soldiers were scrambling to ask for battle. Their goal was very simple. They wanted to take advantage of the situation and get the credit. Although the previous 2 days of attack and sacrifice were valuable, there was not much credit to speak of. But being the first to enter ancient Pine Grotto Heaven and take the lead in killing the Pine Crane clan's disciples was a great merit. Not to mention, only 8,000 of the 9,000 soldiers attacking the Grotto Heaven's entrance were left. Those 8,000 soldiers were already exhausted, but these 6,000 elite soldiers were conserving their strength, ready to go. They believed that the Blood Prison Marshal would agree to their request and send them as the vanguard to attack ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. Sure enough, the Blood Prison Marshal nodded in agreement after a little consideration. He looked at the 3 captains who were eager to give it a try and said with a dignified tone, "The other captains have been fighting a bloody battle for 2 days, but you have been recuperating and building up your strength. Ben Shuai hopes that you can understand that as the vanguard, you must show an indomitable spirit and determination that does not fear death. After attacking ancient Pine Grotto Heaven, Ben Shuai will personally supervise the army. If anyone dares to take a step back, they will be executed without mercy." Clearly, the Blood Prison Marshal had expected that the bloody battle would only begin after attacking ancient Pine Grotto Heaven. When the time came, the battle would be even crueler. It would not be so easy for these 6,000 soldiers to get credit. The 3 generals understood the meaning of the Blood Prison Marshal's words. Their expressions turned cold and they saluted solemnly, saying, "Please rest assured, Grand Marshal. We will not fail our mission." The Blood Prison Marshal nodded in satisfaction and motioned for the 3 generals to withdraw. The 3 generals gathered their troops and got into a charging formation outside the Grotto Heaven's entrance, ready to go. Not long after, the defensive formation of ancient Pine Grotto Heaven emitted cracking sounds, and shards of divine light filled the sky. Under everyone's gaze, the defensive formation could not bear the burden and finally shattered, collapsing on the spot. The sky was filled with fragments of divine light, and a gap with a radius of more than 10 miles appeared in the formation. The blurry scene inside the ancient pine paradise could be vaguely seen. Many soldiers could see that there were nearly 3,000 disciples of the Pine Crane clan in the cave. All of them looked haggard and disheveled, with frightened and panicked expressions on their faces. "Ha! We've finally breached it. Everyone charge. What are you waiting for? Charge in and kill all the Pine Crane bastards. Ancient Pine Paradise is filled with traitors. Kill them all, leave no one alive." The soldiers under the command of the Blood Prison Marshal all cheered excitedly, shouting that they wanted to charge in. In their eyes, once the defensive formation of the Grotto Heaven was broken, the Pine Crane disciples would be like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They could do whatever they wanted. Although the 8,000 soldiers had been attacking continuously for 2 days, they had used up a lot of their divine power and felt very tired. However, victory and merit were right in front of them. They all rushed forward without regard for their own safety, wanting to be the first to rush into ancient pine paradise. However, the 6,000 soldiers who had been accumulating power and waiting were even faster than them. Whoosh, whoosh. The 6,000 soldiers were divided into 3 groups. They cut through the sky as fast as lightning, passing through the gap in the formation and taking the lead to rush into ancient pine paradise. They were silent and did not shout any slogans. However, they were all holding back a powerful burst of power. Their bodies were brimming with blazing killing intent. These 6,000 soldiers were not only powerful and majestic slaughterers, but they were also fast as lightning. They were the vanguard that launched a sudden attack. The 8,000 soldiers were dumbfounded. When they came to their senses, they all showed angry and unconvinced expressions and secretly cursed. Damn it! We actually let those bastards get ahead of us. 2 days ago when we attacked the Grotto Heaven formation, they stayed in the divine worship to rest. Now they want to take the lead and take the credit? We watered and fertilized and they came to pick the fruit? No, we have to get an explanation for this. Everyone, don't be impulsive. Since they dared to do this, they must have been instructed by the Grand Marshal. Don't just stand there. We can discuss this after the battle. We have to charge in too. We can't let them get ahead of us. There were finally some people among the soldiers who understood. Now was not the time to bicker about the credit. The most important thing was to rush into ancient pine paradise and kill the enemy. Only then could they obtain credit. Kill. Charge. Don't let them get ahead of us. It's our credit. We can't run away. The Grand Marshal is watching us. Everyone, don't embarrass the general. The many soldiers shouted and waved their weapons. They charged into ancient pine paradise without any regard for their own safety. After a short while, all 14,000 soldiers had entered ancient pine grotto. At this moment the blood prison marshal led over 20 god kings and generals through the gap at a moderate pace, entering ancient pine grotto heaven. There were no soldiers left to guard the gap in the formation. The blood hell marshal felt that there was no need. After all, a gap of several dozen miles could not be repaired in a short period of time. Long before the formation was breached, the Pine Crane disciples and the 2,000 captives had already made preparations for battle. The 3,000 disciples who had cast spells to support the formation pretended to be panicked when they saw the formation being breached. However, they were actually very calm inside. When they saw the 6,000 fast and murderous vanguard army charging into ancient pine paradise, they symbolically resisted for a moment before retreating in a sorry state. The 6,000 vanguard army's murderous intent was too strong. They were also very anxious. They only wanted to kill all the Pine Crane disciples as soon as possible and take the credit. When they saw the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples fleeing in a sorry state, their morale was even higher. They chased even more ferociously. However, they did not notice a detail. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who seemed to be retreating in a panic were actually not in a mess. Instead, they were retreating into the trap formation in an orderly manner. On the other side, the 3,000 disciples who were meditating and recuperating in the trap formation had already made preparations and were ready to attack. Even the Pine Crane Patriarch, a few elders, and the patriarchs of the 4 ancient clans had taken out their weapons and were ready for battle. Finally, after more than 300 of the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples were killed, the remaining 2,600 managed to escape into the range of the trap formation. On the surface, it looked like they were flying over a grassland. The 6,000 vanguard army with murderous intent did not have any scruples or defenses. They surged forward like a torrent. There was no doubt that they had also entered the grassland and stepped into the trap formation. However, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry to make a move. He, the 3,000 Pine Crane disciples, and the elders of the 4 ancient clans were under the cover of the formation. They were not discovered by the enemy. The Pine Crane Patriarch and the elders' hearts were in their throats. They could not wait to activate the formation immediately and kill the 6,000 vanguard army. However, Ji Tianqing had to wait for the remaining 8,000 vanguard army to enter the trap before he could kill them all. Chapter 42-32. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were in charge of acting as bait were also on tenterhooks. They originally thought that after luring the 6,000 vanguard troops into the trap, they would have completed their mission and would be able to counterattack. However, that was not the case. From the very beginning, Kenshin had a plan. They wanted to capture the enemy in one fell swoop and try their best not to leak any information. Therefore, they could only wait for the 8,000 vanguard troops and the many godly king experts to arrive before they could launch a counterattack. This put the 3,000 pine crane disciples and captives in a difficult position. They could not keep retreating and running. Otherwise, by the time the 8,000 vanguard troops entered the trap, they would have already fled 20,000 miles away and left the trap's range. In order to keep the 14,000 vanguard troops in the trap, the 3,000 pine crane disciples could only slow down and turn around to block the vanguard troops' charge. Bam, 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 bam. Kill. Brothers, hold on. Don't retreat anymore. The two sides engaged in close combat within the formation. Divine light collided and a series of loud, dull sounds erupted that shook the heavens and the earth. The 3,000 pine crane disciples and captives tried their best and did not fight the vanguard troops head-on. However, the enemy had doubled in number and they were still at a disadvantage. Very soon, the number of casualties increased drastically. Fortunately, this situation did not last for long. After a short while, the 8,000 vanguard troops roared and charged over. Seeing the 6,000 vanguard troops besieging the 3,000 pine crane disciples, how could they just stand by and watch? Of course, they charged over as quickly as possible and surrounded the pine crane disciples to kill as many of them as possible. Just like that, after 6 or 7 breaths, the 8,000 vanguard troops all entered the trap. More than 10,000 vanguard troops gathered in the sky above the 20,000-mile grassland and launched a one-sided siege. The 3,000 pine crane disciples and captives were in despair. Their mentality was about to collapse. They were already besieged by 14,000 vanguard troops and their numbers were decreasing sharply. However, Kenshin still did not make a move. Could it be that Kenshin would only make a move after they were all killed? What was Kenshin waiting for? At this moment, the Blood Prison Marshal led more than 20 godly kings and generals and flew over the sky at a moderate pace. They arrived above the grassland. They assumed the posture of high and mighty powerhouses. They only glanced at the battle situation on the grassland, and then turned their gazes to the depths of ancient pine paradise. The various god kings and generals began to discuss among themselves. Why were there only 3,000 disciples from the pine crane race intercepting them? What about the rest of them? What about the reinforcements sent by the other 4 ancient clans? Could it be that they were all holed up in the Pine Crane Divine Palace and had no intention of coming out to fight? Meanwhile, inside the trap formation, Patriarch Song He, the elders, and the patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans paled. Everyone looked at the Blood Prison Marshal who was surrounded by so many god kings. They immediately showed respect and worry. Blood Hell Marshal? Oh my god. Why is he here? The Blood Prison Marshal actually personally led an army to attack ancient Pine Paradise. Commander Mingi's determination to take revenge is so firm. He actually sent the Blood Prison Marshal to personally lead the troops. The 5 patriarchs and elders were filled with shock and disbelief. But after the shock and fear, everyone came back to their senses and recovered their confidence and composure. After all, with the Kenshin presiding over this place, what did they have to be afraid of? Just as the 5 patriarchs calmed down, Ji Tianxing had already moved with lightning speed and fully activated the trap formation. After all, the Blood Prison Marshal and more than 20 god kings and generals had also stepped into the range of the trap. Everyone was here. Whoosh. The grassland that was in chaos due to the fierce battle of more than 10,000 soldiers suddenly lit up with 5-colored divine light that shot into the sky. In just an instant, a 5-colored barrier of light with a radius of 20,000 miles appeared out of thin air and enveloped this area. This was not a newly activated formation, but a formation that had been in an invisible state finally revealed its true appearance. The 5-colored barrier of light was more than a foot thick and was formed by 3 high-grade king-level divine formations. Its power was very close to that of a supreme-grade king-level formation. The formation rapidly operated and released invisible divine power that fiercely suppressed the 14,000 soldiers under the Blood Prison Marshal's command. Within a radius of 20,000 miles within the chaotic 10,000 soldiers, the divine power released by the formation would not harm its own side and would accurately suppress the enemy. This required Ji Tianxing to have extremely high control of the formation and reach the level of minute detail. Without a doubt, his formation skills had reached the pinnacle, so of course he could do it. The fierce battle in the field instantly stopped. The 2,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were lucky enough to survive retreated into the distance in shock, panting in panic. The 14,000 soldiers under the Blood Prison Marshal's command stopped attacking in panic and shock. They all looked up at the sky. Seeing the five-colored barrier of light and feeling the invisible, terrifying pressure, everyone trembled in fear. The circulation of their divine power became sluggish, and they even found it difficult to breathe. Looking at this scene, even a fool would know that they had fallen into a trap. They had been ambushed by the Pine Crane clan. Immediately after, the 5 patriarchs and elders, as well as the other 3,000 disciples and captives who had been conserving their strength, appeared one after another. In addition to the 2,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives who were still panting, there were a total of 5,000 people. They were scattered around the formation and surrounded the Blood Prison Marshal's army of 14,000. That's right, it was 5,000 people surrounding 14,000 people. The moment the 5-colored barrier appeared, the Blood Prison Marshal's eyelids twitched violently. An extremely uneasy sense of danger arose in his heart. However, he was very shrewd. His expression was calm and he did not reveal the slightest hint of panic. Instead, the god kings and generals beside him were frightened by the sudden appearance of the 5-colored barrier. They revealed shocked and worried expressions. However, when everyone saw that there were only about 5,000 people in the ambush, they all heaved a sigh of relief. The Blood Prison Marshal was also slightly relieved. His gaze swept across the 5 patriarchs and the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. Pine Hatao, Banshui remembers that you don't seem to be very good at arranging troops, but recently you have set up 2 formations in succession. First, you used the formation outside the Grotto Heaven to kill Banshui's 8,000 soldiers. Now you have set up this formation here. Do you want to rely on this formation and your 5,000 people to eliminate Banshui and his 14,000 soldiers? The Blood Hell Marshal's tone was filled with mockery and ridicule. After he finished speaking, the many god kings and generals beside him laughed loudly and mercilessly mocked Patriarch Pine Crane. The 14,000 soldiers also came back to their senses. The worry and confusion in their hearts disappeared, and they regained their confidence. In their minds, since the marshal dared to say this, he definitely had the confidence to destroy this formation. They had almost 3 times the number of their opponents. They could win with their eyes closed. What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 42:33. Patriarch Pine Crane was not angry at all when faced with the mockery of Marshal Blood Prison and the other god kings and generals. The other 4 patriarchs were also very calm. There was an inexplicable smile at the corner of their mouths. They appeared to be very confident. The 5,000 disciples and captives were also very calm. They did not show any fear. However, when the 2,000 captives saw the Blood Prison Marshal, the god kings and the generals, they felt ashamed. Marshal Blood Prison stared at the 5 patriarchs. He could not help but frown when he saw their reactions. Where did their confidence and courage come from? They dared to be so calm and even confident when facing Banshui? Could it be that other than these 5 forces, they have an even more powerful backer? This thought flashed through Marshal Blood Prison's mind. He could not help but think of Kenshin. At this moment, the 2 generals beside him suddenly exclaimed. They pointed at the captives mixed in with the Pine Crane disciples and shouted, "Everyone look! Aren't those our people? Didn't they say that the 4 Samsara divine generals and 8,000 soldiers were killed by the Pine Crane clan without leaving a single survivor? Look, many of those Pine Crane clansmen are our soldiers." The 2 generals' exclamations attracted everyone's attention. Over 20 god king experts looked in the direction of the voice. Even the Blood Prison Marshal frowned and cast a cold gaze. As expected, among the 5,000 Pine Crane disciples, at least 2,000 of them used to be soldiers under Marshal Blood Prison. The 2,000 soldiers were stared at by Marshal Blood Prison and the other generals. They also had to endure the disdainful gazes of more than 10,000 soldiers. They immediately felt ashamed. Due to the heavenly Dao oath, they could not change sides and return to Marshal Blood Prison's camp. However, their moral standards and loyalty made them feel very awkward. They wished they could find a hole to hide in. Marshal Blood Prison's face darkened. His gaze turned gloomy and cold. However, he did not get angry at the 2,000 captives. Instead, he stared at Patriarch Pine Crane and shouted angrily, Pine Crane, you are truly audacious. You deserve to die. You left 2,000 captives and forced them to join the battle. You pointed your sword at your former brothers and friends. You are truly despicable and shameless. This is also an insult to Ben Shuai. You are finished. If Ben Shuai doesn't tear you to shreds today, he won't be able to answer to his soldiers. The Blood Prison Marshal was a powerhouse of such status and realm. In addition, he had a calm personality. Of course, he would not casually swear an oath in public. However, the weight of his words as well as the hatred he revealed still made people shudder. Patriarch Pine Crane did not panic at all. After all, he had Kenshin standing behind him. His heart was very calm. He smiled calmly and said to Marshal Blood Prison, "Marshal Blood Prison, who is more despicable and shameless? Everyone knows. Why do you have to twist words and force logic? If it weren't for Commander Mingi being so overbearing and wanting to kill my clan, why would we have to meet on the battlefield? Moreover, since we set up this grand formation to fight you here, we never thought of letting you leave alive." The Blood Prison Marshal sneered with an extremely contemptuous expression. He didn't even bother to refute Patriarch Song He. The god kings and generals around him laughed aloud without any restraint. They all mocked the Patriarch. "Ha! Song Hetao, you must have lost your mind, right? With just these few people we'll kill you all in less than an hour. You won't be able to last more than 10 rounds under the Marshal's sword. Song Hetao, if you still have some self-awareness, quickly admit defeat and kneel down to beg for mercy." That's right. Song Hetao, if you kneel down and beg for mercy now, the Marshal can still give you a dignified death. Once the battle starts, you can only be reduced to ashes. There won't even be a corpse left. The Blood Prison Marshal no longer cared about Patriarch Song He. The anger and killing intent in his heart had accumulated to the peak. He looked at the captives in the crowd and said in a dignified tone, "Although you were forced to surrender and fight for the Pine Crane clan in order to survive, Ben Shuai won't punish you. Perhaps the despicable and shameless Song Hetao used some method to control you. Ben Shuai doesn't ask you to change sides. Now you only need to retreat to the edge of the grand formation and watch with folded arms. Ben Shuai wants you to see with your own eyes how tragic the fate of the traitors of the Pine Crane clan will be." When the 2,000 captives heard this, they were inexplicably moved. Many soldiers subconsciously bowed to the Blood Prison Marshal to express their gratitude. However, when they thought of the terrifying heavenly oath, they abruptly extinguished those thoughts. Under the gaze of the crowd, they were very embarrassed. They hesitated and remained silent, not moving for a long time. Seeing the captives' reaction, the Blood Prison Marshal was completely enraged. His face darkened as he angrily rebuked, "A group of cowardly bastards. Have your loyalty and courage been eaten by dogs? Since you disobeyed Ben Shuai's order and wanted to kill your former comrades, then Ben Shuai will not show mercy and will kill all of you. Consider it a military punishment." At this point, the Blood Prison Marshal's patience was exhausted. He immediately waved his hand and gave the order to attack. Kill. Following the Blood Prison Marshal's order, the 14,000 soldiers roared angrily, their bodies bursting with murderous intent. Even though they were suppressed by invisible divine power and their strength was greatly weakened, their morale was still high. However, their morale was high. They waved their weapons stubbornly and launched a counterattack at the 5,000 Pine Crane disciples and captives around them. Patriarch Pine Crane did not waste any more time. He waved his sword and gave the order to attack. The 3,000 Pine Crane disciples and 2,000 captives immediately formed a battle formation and jointly cast spells to launch an attack. Patriarch Pine Crane and the other patriarchs and elders of the 4 ancient clans were not idle either. They all took the lead and joined the battle, casting spells to attack. On the Blood Prison Marshal's side, in addition to the 14,000 soldiers, more than 20 god kings and generals also joined the battle. Even the 9 divine warships released divine power beams and cannons to launch a fierce attack. Only the Blood Prison Marshal stopped in the sky and looked down at the battlefield as if everything was under his control. In the blink of an eye, the battle royale of over 19,000 people was about to begin. Both sides released divine power shadows that blotted out the sky and were about to engage in the most intense collision. The result of the battle between the two sides would definitely be the 5 ancient clans at a disadvantage and suffer heavy casualties. But at this moment, The five-colored light barrier suddenly released tens of thousands of five-colored sword lights and thousands of lightning beams that blasted toward the army under the blood prison marshal. 40,000 five-colored sword lights and 6,000 lightning beams were even more shocking and dazzling than the divine power shadows released by both sides. An invisible pressure that could destroy heaven and earth instantly enveloped the soldiers under the blood prison marshal. Everyone was filled with fear as they felt the aura of death. The patriarchs and elders of the 5 ancient clans were immediately overjoyed and excited. They knew that Kenshin had finally made his move. Translator. Zenobie's editor. Zenobie's.